Good evening.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee of the Newton City Council. I'm Lyle Baker, the chair of the committee. We have several items. I'm going to explain the process in a minute, but I want to welcome all of you who are here in person and all of you who have joined us online to our meeting. I want to introduce the members of the committee who are here. First with me is the Vice Chair, Councilor John Oliver, and then from Ward 1, Councilor Josh Krinsman from Ward 4, Councilor Susan Albright from Ward 2, Councilor Vicki Danberg from Ward 6. We've also been joined in the chamber by Councilor Alan Labowitz from Ward 6 and Councilor Randy Block from Ward 4. Have we got any councilors online that I don't see? We may be joined by others. And we also have our planning director here, Mr. Heath, as well as Mr. Ferguson, who's our director of sustainability, and we're going to be talking primarily about an ordinance called Birdo tonight, but we have two items to take care of. First, we also been joined by Councilor Wright from Ward 3, a member of the committee. And let me explain the process tonight for those of you here for the first time. This is, we have several items to take care of. We have an appointment to make. We also have an item that the planning department has given us that relates to how we process and respond to zoning requests that are called special permits. And then the bulk of the evening is going to be devoted to the question of how we respond to Birdo. And I'll explain the process about how I anticipate us taking up Birdo when we reach that point in the discussion. But those of you who are here for that, just please bear with us, and we'll give you an opportunity to be heard and also to listen. So with that introduction, I'd like to go to see if Ms. Yarvis is here online. Is she here with us? Oh, she's here in person. Please come up to the, you don't have to stand back there. I go this way, I think, around, and then come into the. We had heard that you might be online. My apologies. I didn't mean. Here, come on up to the, and just have a seat if you don't mind. And Mr. Ferguson will turn the mic over to you. So let me read the item into the record. This is the appointment of Lori Yarvis to the Economic Development Commission. Her Honor, the Mayor appointing Lori Yarvis of 1469 Center Street, Newton, as a member of the Economic Development Commission for a term of office set to expire on October 30th, 2026. So, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. So, our custom is to ask you to say a word or two about your background, although we have that information in writing, and then open it up for conversation and questions from the committee. Is that all right? Okay. So, you want to say a little bit about yourself? Let me make sure.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me and for considering me and the appointment to the Economic Development Commission. As mentioned, my name is Lori Yarvis, and I'm a longtime resident of Newton. Moved here in 2002 from Park Slope, Brooklyn. Moved here with my family and two children just after 9/11, which was a difficult time to be living in New York City. And coming to Newton was a breath of fresh air, literally. And also just, it was a beautiful, green, peaceful city, it felt very safe. One of the things I noticed immediately was the incredible civic pride that people had here and how important community was. And I value community very much. I mean, I was amazed, my children went to the Underwood School, and I was amazed at how, even at that age, they were being taught core values, one of which was the importance of respect and responsibility to the community, which is something I have always deeply believed in. I'm a lawyer, have practiced law for a good long time, and first practiced in New York City at a big law firm called Winston and Strawn. And at that time, I was representing banks and financial institutions, but always helping them provide financing to their commercial customers, which were businesses. And so I started to learn about what is important to businesses and what makes a good business and what businesses prioritize. And over the years, I reinvented myself a few times. I worked in community development for a legal services organization, helping some businesses in disadvantaged communities learn to survive and thrive. And then I eventually opened up my own law practice, working with small businesses. And my clients are what I call closely held, meaning that they are generally owned by either single owners or a few partners or a family, or they are a group of owners who don't have significant private equity or venture capital investment, and they're not public companies. And when we moved to Newton, I first joined the law firm of Schlesinger and Bookbinder and was their sort of corporate lawyer, did some real estate work, and then eventually in 2011, I joined another local Newton-based law firm called Archstone Law Group as a part owner. And I have continued to work with small business owners and to build my client practice. And one of the joys of my practice is helping my clients survive and thrive and institutionalize best practices and help them achieve their goals and dreams. And again, it has been a real education for me working with small businesses over the years to really understand what keeps them up at night, what is important to the owners, and so tying that into community and why community is important. Well, as they say, a rising tide floats all boats. And so when Newton's businesses are surviving and thriving, we all survive and thrive. It makes the city vibrant and a wonderful place to live and raise a family and to grow old in. In fact, when my children were old enough to leave the nest and go off to college and were on their own, my husband and I downsized. And where did we downsize? To Newton. So we're still here. And it would be a sincere pleasure for me to lend my skills and roll up my sleeves and work for the people of Newton through the Economic Development Commission. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Jarvis from members of the committee? Councilor Wright. And we've joined by Councilor Farrell from Ward 8, and also Councilor Albright. I'll recognize you next, and then Councilor Danberg.
Thank you very much. Thank you for stepping up into serving. So do you still practice in Newton? Do you have a lot of work there, or?
Yes, I do. I have a significant number of clients that are based in Newton, and I'm still very actively full-time and have always been full-time. And my practice is located in Newton as well.
Okay. Your experience is going to bring a lot to the table, especially Newton specific. But will you, if you have a conflict of interest, will you step aside or not vote on something or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would, certainly follow the protocol that the city has in place, and would, recuse myself from discussion and vote on, any matters that were before the commission involving a client. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being willing to serve on this commission. So we recently set the tax rate for Newton, I think it was last week, and we did the 175% shift to the commercial based on residential. And one of the things that's becoming more clearer to me as time goes along, so the Newton's tax base is 85% residential and the rest of it is commercial or industrial. So do you think that's the right mix, or is there anything that we can do to up the commercial and industrial? Is that something that you have an interest in, or are we okay the way we are?
That is a really good question. And, I'm afraid that I don't think I could have an opinion without sort of diving in a little bit to understand, the sort of the underpinnings of, the current breakdown or allocation and what the history is. I mean, from the business perspective, obviously the business owners and certainly the small business owners would prefer to pay as little as possible. But it seems to me that, if you are a stakeholder in Newton, whether you're a residential real estate owner or commercial, you do have to contribute. So, but it's hard for me to just speak top of the head. So
Well, I'll come back to you in a year's time. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Ms. Yarvis, thank you very much for standing up in your community and being willing to serve. You have a very impressive resume. I noticed that you list Newton and Park Slope, New York. I have 2 of my 3 children have lived and loved Park Slope. And we are very glad that you've now moved and made your home in Newton. I would be very happy when the time comes, since Ms. Yarvis is in Ward 6 and I am a Ward 6 counselor, I would be very happy to move your approval. Thank you.
I'm sure she'd be glad to have improvement as well as approval, but anyway, as would we all. I just want to recognize Councilor Leary. Apologies, Ward 1 has joined us, not a member of the committee, and now Councilor Getz is here, who is a member of the committee. Any other questions? Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'll echo my colleagues' thanks in your willingness to step up and contribute. I appreciate that. One thing that has struck me over the past few years with regards to Newton and economic development is that we are, I think it's fair to say, we are understaffed in that department. I think we have 1 full-time employee there. I would like to extend a personal, if there's anything you see that you believe that the City Council might be able to do to contribute to the success of economic development in the city of Newton, I sit right here. I'd love to hear it. Thank you again for your willingness to serve.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Danberg?
Thank you. I move to approve.
All right, a motion is made to approve. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? The ayes have it. You've been approved by the committee. Your appointment will go before the full council. I don't think you have to stay up late to worry about it. It generally is followed. And we thank you very much for your willingness to serve.
It's an honor to be appointed and to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one item on our agenda tonight from the Planning Department, which I'm going to ask Mr. Heath if he would be willing with his colleagues to report now, because as I read the recommendation, there is nothing we need to do. And any chance we have not to do something appropriately, it's a good idea. You want to speak to that? Let me tell the item. So we'd get it out of, we'll take it out of order, and that way you and your colleagues do not need to stay, although you're welcome to do so. This is item 26724, request for discussion and possible amendments to require disclosure of any anticipated change in grade as a part of a land use special permit application. So, Mr. Heath?
Deputy Director Kyra, who's been very attentive and responsive to this issue, is online and can speak very briefly to this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Kyra, would you like to speak briefly or otherwise?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this, we put together a short memo in response to this docket item, and the quick summary is that there are a number of things that the city is currently doing to understand grade changes in special permits. All special permits require site plans that show existing and proposed grades on them. That's already in the ordinance. Staff provided a training for city councilors recently on, things to look for when reading these site plans to better understand the grading or retaining walls. This council has recently adopted a couple of zoning amendments, one around retaining walls and one around how height is measured, that will limit the ability to really manipulate the grade, even in by right projects. And in NewGov, the city's online permitting portal, we have made changes that ask in a special permit application if the grade will be changed by 1 foot or more. Anyone that answers yes to that is then required to submit a couple of site sections that are meant to better illustrate the existing and proposed grades and how they relate to the proposed buildings. This is a relatively recent change. I know a number of these have come before the Land Use Committee already. This is something that we'd like to keep working closely with the Land Use Committee on to see if this is helpful or if there's something that could be more helpful, and to monitor this. So at the moment, our recommendation is that there isn't anything necessary, but this is something that we will continue to track and can report back on.
Thank you, Ms. Kyra. Any member of the committee have a question on there was a memo in our packet, and any elaboration that Councilor Wright?
Thank you. It's kind of parallel to this. I was in Newton Historic last week, and one of the developers wanted to reduce the height of their lot, but they said that cannot be done with this new ordinance. I would think that they would be able to.
Yeah, so there's no change in how we measure height if you're lowering the grade, if you're cutting instead of filling on the site. I don't know if maybe they're running up against the retaining wall ordinance and would require retaining walls more than 4 feet in lowering the grade, but the height measurements shouldn't affect that.
No, in fact, it would get rid of retaining walls if they could lower it. So it was a built-up lot. So I'll try to pursue that. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been joined by the Vice President, Councilor Kalis. I just want to recognize him. Councilor Getz.
Could Jen, would you, or Ms. Cara, would you please? Can we revisit this in 6 months? Get an update, some sort of information, so that we don't let this linger for too long. Because I'd like for us to be able to assess what's going on and the effectiveness. So I'd appreciate if we could schedule something like for 6 months.
Absolutely.
That's not this item, though. Would you just like to have some discussion about how the measurement process is proceeding? Is that
No,
what I'm hearing?
there's in the recommendation piece of it, it talks to revisit and see if additional modifications or materials are needed. I'd like for that assessment to be given to us so that then we can, proceed if needed.
Well, so I think maybe if you would like to do that, the easiest way to do that is to just, if you don't mind, docket a separate item and we'll maintain it on the agenda. This one, I think we can vote no action necessary. Is that agreeable? Okay. So I'd entertain a motion. Oh, Councilor Albright, I'm sorry.
I just want to make the motion, no action necessary.
Okay, thank you. I will certainly accept that motion. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Kyra, and thank you, Mr. Heath. You are welcome to stay online or in person, but you are released if you would like to go home, and I figured that you might. Now we turn to the main item for tonight. Counselor, the Vice Chair is going to join me up here because the Vice Chair has been very hardworking on this item for a number of weeks. So this is, for those of you who are in the audience who are not familiar, and I'm reading numbers, these are ways of identifying measures that come before the City Council. They're called docket numbers. And the docket number is 4224, requests for discussion and ordinance to require energy use reporting. And I'm going to read the whole item into the record. Councilors Albright, Danberg, and Leary, on behalf of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy, requesting discussion and an ordinance that would require large property owners, campuses, and large commercial buildings to report energy use and associated greenhouse gas emissions annually to the City of Newton, to be used to encourage reductions in said energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in accordance and support of the goals set forth in the Newton Climate Action Plan. Now, let me explain what the process I anticipate following tonight, subject to the will of the committee. So this ordinance, as you heard from the docket item, is designed that over a period of time, many large non-residential buildings in the city will gradually have to reduce their use of fossil fuels through changing over to electricity or reducing consumption through increased efficiency. Now, we heard as a committee public comment on this proposal earlier this year. Tonight, I would like to entertain public comment on behalf of the committee, hopefully focused on two aspects: whether to include large residential buildings, that's not part of what we had heard discussed before, and how to respond to Newton Wellesley Hospital, which has asked for special treatment under the ordinance, specifically exemption. Now, thanks to Mr. Andrew Lee of the Newton Law Department. Is Mr. Lee online? If you hear, there he is. Mr. Lee is here.
Yeah.
Thank you. In the packet, that's the document for those of you who are not followers of the City Council process. Every Friday we get a packet called the Friday Packet. In the packet are large versions, are three versions, not large, they also are large, three versions of the ordinance designed to accomplish these goals. One is a non-residential large buildings only. That's the first version. The second includes large residential buildings as well. A third includes large residential buildings, but only requires monitoring and reporting of energy use so that a baseline of information can be obtained in case a decision would be made later to add large residential buildings into the ordinance for compliance. So we have with us tonight to explain this ordinance, he's been here before, but he's here again, is Mr. William Ferguson, Co-Director of Sustainability, and of course, Mr. Lee, who I've just introduced from the Law Department. At a prior meeting of the committee, we took a non-binding straw vote to include large residential buildings fully in the ordinance. However, we had done that without having an opportunity to hear from the public. So my expectation is tonight to entertain comment and then bring it back into committee so that we decide what to recommend to the full council. And again, because the vice chair has been active in this, I've asked him to participate with me and make sure I get everything correctly stated. And what we will do is entertain a public comment period, and this is not a public hearing formally, but it's an opportunity for people to be heard. And at the conclusion of that public comment period, we will bring the item back into committee for discussion among members of the committee and those city councilors who are here with us. Let me explain the public comment process. Everyone who wishes to speak, and we have several names and addresses, and Ms. Norton, who's our clerk, will provide additional places to people to sign up. We would ask you to limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. If a comment has been made for which you agree, you can just indicate that, but in each case, we'd ask you to give your name and address so that we have that for the record. And I would just indicate that we have, as members of the council and individually, received many communications by email recently, especially, about this item, and it's just practically impossible to respond to those properly. But we do appreciate them, and they're all part of the record of what we rely upon for making decisions. And then once we bring the item back into committee, I will then ask for another set of straw votes in committee to determine which of the 3 versions of the ordinance, if at all, we wish to recommend forward to the council. And then after I have a sense of the committee, entertain a vote on the ordinance as we think it ought to go forward. But I hope to be able to do that in a way that makes the discussion orderly and we can try and make the best use of everybody's time tonight. Before I begin, I just want to offer Mr. Ferguson an opportunity to say anything if he would like to at the beginning before we entertain public comment. Mr. Ferguson?
Thank you, Chair Baker. I just want to point out that the version of this ordinance that the city has sponsored and is in favor of is a version that addresses non-residential buildings. That's the version we submitted initially in May. It does not include residential buildings in any form or fashion. Strictly commercial buildings greater than 20,000 square feet. I would also add that the 2 versions, the 2 additional versions that the chair mentioned, we drafted those, or specifically Andrew Lee drafted those from our law department on behalf of councilors at their request. So we're providing services, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily advocating anything other than the non-residential version of that ordinance. Councilor Danberg and I had a discussion earlier today, and she may want to talk about that later, and I can provide some further information at that point about our discussion earlier today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. So we'll entertain public comment, and I have a list of names of people who've signed up. Again, I would ask you to keep your comments brief. There's no requirement to go under 3 minutes, but we do ask you to stay under 3 minutes. The first speaker and entertain is Jim Pransky, I believe it is. Is that correct, Mr. Pransky? Please come, and the microphone should be able to turn on so we can hear you clearly. Just make sure you speak clearly into the microphone because all of this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I don't think Councilor Albright will assist.
Okay, yeah. My name is Jim Pransky. I'm a owner of a condo at 250 Hammond Pond Parkway. And I just wanted to say that I did some research on this, and I read some articles on it, and it looks like the time has not come to have the technology available to do this at any kind of a reasonable price, and having this as some kind of assessment to residents, which would obviously have to happen if something were a fortune, would really place a lot of people, particularly people on fixed incomes, in a very, very bad position. and it would affect rents and buildings, and it would affect all kinds of condo fees and so forth. Even the town of Brookline, as liberal as they are, did not apply this to the residential buildings. In Boston is the same thing. I wanted to ask the council to please allow the superintendent of our building, who's been a superintendent for 40 years and has done considerable research in keeping track of all the different methods of heating and air conditioning and what the figures are with green and all that sort of thing, to give his evaluation of what he has to say. And he's going to be speaking today. His name is John Breckner.
John Breckner, is that correct? Mr. Breckner, you're next on the list, so welcome.
Good evening, Council. I'm John Breckner, the Facilities Director at 250.
Give me just a second. I just have to confer with the Vice Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. This is why the Vice Chair is so valuable. He keeps me from making mistakes.
Okay, once again, I'm John Breckner, the Facilities Director at the Towers at Chestnut Hill, as well as a resident of 250 Hammond Pond Parkway. I've been the Superintendent or the Facilities Director for 40 years, and over the many years of my tenure, we've made many energy improvements to conserve energy throughout all the years. We've done lighting, we've done water conservation, we've also done upgrades to our energy management systems. So we currently have our own state-of-the-art energy management, new motors, controls, et cetera, all to reduce our consumption. All of it to make our home a more comfortable and obviously operate in a more cost savings way. We also do something at the Towers, which I'm sure not a lot of properties do. We do cogeneration. That's also saved us a considerable amount of money. So that's a very high efficient use of fossil fuel. One of the things I'd like the board to do and consider is, or the council, visit all of these properties personally. I'd like to invite any one of you to come to the Towers and see what our building is all about. Trying to upgrade this building at this time with the current technology, I think would be virtually impossible and cost prohibitive. But again, who knows what the technology in the future may bring. And again, at the Towers, we're more than willing to embrace any new technologies to try to save and conserve. But again, I really feel that it's necessary that the council come visit each and every one of these residential properties before you start putting restrictions on them and forcing them to make changes that they may physically not be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Advice. We appreciate your enthusiasm. We just ask, as a matter of both speed and comedy, that we limit the commentary that comes from the audience other than what is heard formally. I do want to recognize we have online Peter Barrer. I just want to let some of the online folks have a word. Mr. Barrer, you have 3 minutes. And identify yourself for the record too, please.
Yes, I'm Peter Barrer. I live at 60 Endicott Street in Newton Highlands. I've been involved in figuring out how to account for and the costs of Birdo. And particularly at one site where we've took an intensive study to figure out how much would it cost to convert that apartment residence to to heat pumps. And I can say, emphatically that the technology exists now, and it is feasible, and the materials are off the shelf, and you can find a contractor who will do it. I've also noticed that there are other manufacturers who are promising something in 6 months, 9 months, next year, and that the market is being filled with other manufacturers who see a future growth of heat pumps for larger buildings. Part of my responsibility was to estimate the cost of converting this particular building.
I'm sorry, Mr. Barrer, which building are you speaking of? I didn't quite hear that.
Oh, I didn't mention it. It's one of the Capasso buildings on Lexington Street.
Okay, carry on.
And, I made an estimate of the cost, and I can say it's more of an upper bound cost. It's hard to know exactly right now because the technology is so new, the contractors aren't used to it, how much it'll actually cost to convert a building. You also have to, add in the cost of the electrical upgrade from the utility. So I understand the reluctance of building owners to back this, of residential buildings to back this idea. But on the other hand, as the market matures, as the manufacturer, as contractors get used to it, I think we'll have a much better idea of the costs. So I'm very much in favor of collecting the information, one of your three options, collecting the information from residential buildings now. And as that data becomes available, the city will become more and more able to write an ordinance that fits those circumstances. So I hope you can pass, move Berto to the full council and include collecting the information of residences without requiring their compliance at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barra, and for staying under 3 minutes. Let me come back into the chamber. It looks like the next speaker is Arnon Garg. Am I got that right? Yes, sir. Would you just come forward, please, and identify yourself more clearly than I have for the record? We need to turn the mic on, Mr.
President. My name is Anand Garg. I am an engineer, retired engineer. Recently moved to Hammond Parkway, bought a condo there. And I'm seeing it there. And I have been living in this country for past more than 50 years. So I have seen all the buildings all over. My main business was working for nuclear power plants. Now I'm retired and I have seen all the buildings. So from my own experience, I'll tell you what I have seen. Recently, our new President Trump said, "Frack, baby, frack." He doesn't care about the environment or the soil or ground. Aquifer will be damaged and all gases come out from the ground and poison all the atmosphere in the country. He doesn't care because he's going for the profit, own profit and profit for his people around him. He doesn't care. Elon Musk will say the same thing. So he is making money for the industrialists and people there. Anyway, it is not my problem. My problem is this, that for 30 years, as John mentioned, we have been using hot water heating in the building for about 500 residents there. It is working fine, and they have fine-tuned it, and so it is very economical also. Now, if you change electrical, they have to see all changes there. They have to make it work. Secondly, you have to change all the equipment there. It will cost lots of money, tremendous money. And people who are living there, I'm retired, they are like the other retired people there, they have a limited income. So their bill will go up quite a bit. So what will happen? Many people will have a problem. So did the city consider that? The city needs to consider that will affect the people living there. Third, because we are giving tax to the city of Newton. So city of Newton should know how to affect the residents. I thought city's main duty is to welfare of the people living there, not to hurt them. Also, when I was living in a rental property earlier, I got 3 or 4 notifications to choose the cheapest electricity available. And they all give you so much cost per kilowatt hour, but then they add to it extra items, conveyance, the distribution, all those costs. So the cost goes sky high. So how will you prevent that? So you are checking on the common people to pay for the bill.
Your
electrical company,
time is
electrical
expired.
appliance producers, they want to sell their products. So they give a discount to builders. And so what happens that they,
Excuse me, your time is expired. You want to finish up?
pardon me?
Your time is expired, sir.
Okay, sorry about that. So what I will say that this is a very bad proposal and it should be not done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Our next speaker is, it looks like Gaurish Chandra, is that? Yes. Again, I've mispronounced your name because of my misreading. Please correct it.
Sure.
And give us your name and address again.
Sure. Good evening, Council. My name is Gaurish Chandrasekhar. My full name is Gauri Shankar Chandrasekhar.
Yeah, speak into the mic a little more if you don't mind.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Excellent. My name is Gauri Shankar Chandrasekhar. I'm one of the board of trustees at the Towers, 250 Hammond Pond Parkway. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and provide some commentary and represent some of the, thoughts of my fellow residents at the Towers. Couple of things as we learned about Birdo was, at least when this was being proposed as including the residential property, was what is the total impact of this footprint that was being chased? So as we looked at it, some of the data suggested that only 5% of the residential property would be impacted by this proposal, versus you have some other larger slice of opportunity that was not being included. For example, this would be the single-family residence, right? Or some of the other transportation opportunities and some other commercials that is excluded from this as well. So the impact on home ownership is going to be fairly dramatic, right? Plus, what we heard is, as Cambridge tried to pass this, they were actually contemplating including residential consideration for Birdo, and that was explicitly rejected by the populace, and it was taken into consideration. So all I can do is request that this council take that really to heart, that without proper technologies, that is something that is viable, it becomes an undue financial stress and burden to some of the fellow residents that live at the Towers, but I'm sure at other places as well. The second thing I would just make as a comment is, if you're thinking of proposing, collecting, and reporting data, we just don't know how it is going to be used. If there is not going to be a plan to actually use that for bringing into consideration the residential properties, why even collect that information, right? Because we don't know how that information is going to be used and whether population or the public is going to have an opportunity to once again comment, or will that be passed in a different setting where we may not have an opportunity to vocalize our vote or rejection of that proposal. So with that,
Your time is almost up. So.
Sure. That I would just say, on behalf of Towers and some of the fellow residents, that we really rethink this for the residential properties being included as part of the Birdo consideration. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me go online. I want to recognize, it looks like Jan,
Saglio?
Thank you. I just don't want to mispronounce it, but I obviously would have. Please.
Well, Saglio is another alternative. So.
Okay, that'll work. You have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Sure, thank you. Jan Saglio, 95 Fair Oaks Avenue in Newtonville. I wanted to share a little bit of information from my experience with Birdo in Boston. And one thing is that I managed some school buildings from early in the 1900s in Dorchester, and they're both subject to Birdo. And we haven't really had any trouble complying. And one example of an opportunity we were able to take advantage of is that when we went to put air conditioning in a 1914 old convent building that houses our middle school. There was very little additional cost to using the heat pumps for heat as well as cooling. So there are lots, I think that with enough lead time, there's lots of opportunities to bring down your carbon footprint and comply in some of these larger buildings. And my other point is just a correction. Just became a co-owner in a co-op building in Boston, and that's big enough to be subject to BERDO there. And it is subject, larger residential buildings are subject to BERDO. And you can see them listed on their website. So just want to correct that.
Thank you. Let me bring back to the chamber now Mr. Dante Capasso, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, councilors. Dante Capasso, 49 Lexington Street. I'll try and make a new relevant comment tonight because I know many of you heard from me. No matter what way you slice and dice this will be a tectonic shift and increase living costs in this city significantly. I know that because I'm the one who sets the rental rates for our apartments, and I'm already raising them in anticipation of millions of dollars of renovations over the next 25 years, over half a dozen residential and half a dozen commercial buildings. No matter how many times we say the word incentive or capital planning, this is the single largest governmental way to increase housing costs that I know my family has seen in almost 60 years of operating in Newton. I wasn't planning on going over this, but our building was called out by name. For the record, that case study is highly disputed by me, and it's based on two things: the cost and availability of that proposed equipment and the availability of incentives. Number one, if that equipment is so widely available, how come the contractor who quoted it to the city, and again, that whole thing is based off one quote, as well as the city employees and the consultants could not show me one example where it is currently being used in Massachusetts or the Northeast for that purpose? Nowhere. Do I hope it gains some traction and will be in the future? Absolutely. But as of now, they could not point to one example where it is being used. And the second part of that study, I believe, was incentives. I'm going to give you one quick example that literally just happened to me. I signed on with a Mass Save contractor to put 4 EV charging stations in one of my office buildings. I believe it was we pay 20% and incentives and grants and whatever pick up another 80%. I fill out all this confusing state paperwork. I didn't really understand. I waited months for a response. During the time I waited for a response, the Mass Save contractor called me and said, there's a new incentive out there. Well, we're going to give you it's either level 1 or level 3, whatever the highest level charger is. I think it's 1. And you only have to pay sales tax. So of course I kind of dropped that incentive and picked up this one. After I let the window pass on the first incentive, I was told we're out of money. So can you promise me all the incentives that we talk about contributing so much money to this BERDO ordinance is going to be there for us over the next 25 years when we do this work? Second to last, I know we haven't talked a lot about commercial, but keeping commercial in does not keep rent safe. I can only speak for myself here, but we own commercial and residential properties. And since we don't really have the ability to raise commercial rents due to the length of leases and the state of the commercial market, it's going to have to come from somewhere, and there's room to go in the apartments. So keeping commercial in does not keep the housing costs or the rent safe. And lastly, standing invitation for any site visits for any of my family's buildings as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Capasso. So let me go online. I want to recognize Deb Crosley, a former member of this council and former chair of this committee. Ms. Crosley.
Thank you, Chair Baker, and good evening, everyone. I want to make 2 points as quickly as I can. First is in the context of considering whether or not to include large residential properties in this first round. I just want to beg you not to delay this process any further. If you wind up from this meeting feeling as though more information needs to be sought, then I would urge you to pass the ordinance now for commercial properties. I have a long standing respect and admiration for Peter Bearer, who I think just offered a wonderful compromise. because while it is clear that there is trepidation with respect to residential property owners working this problem at this time, you also deal with perspective. And the perspective out there is limited by our knowledge of technology and the rate at which it's coming forward, even though it's coming forward pretty quickly. So I think it would be great to get the reporting into the ordinance, but not yet to require emissions reductions according to a schedule that people are not comfortable with yet. And let our staff do the work that needs to be done out in this community of large property owners, residential property owners. In the meantime, second, Newton Wellesley Hospital. I read the large red section, page 28 and 29 in your packet, offering them an exemption for hospital property and medical facilities. I am a huge fan of Newton Wellesley Hospital, and I think overall, we and the council should do everything in its power to make sure that campus functions really well. However, when we worked with Newton Wellesley Hospital or had conversations with them about electrification, they said that they didn't want to be subject to the electrification ordinance, but a performance-based ordinance like BERDO, which they are helping to write in the city of Boston, and they have no exclusions there, would be much preferred. I think the exemption offered to them here is extremely generous, and I wouldn't go any further than that if you go that far. Thank you.
Thank you, and right on time. A former chair knows how to time things. Thank you. Now let's bring back into the chamber. It looks like this is Philip Hanser. Is that correct? Philip Hanser?
Philip Hanser, 40 Cedar Street in Newton. I'm also
just speak a little more into the mic, Mr. Hanser.
Philip Hanser, 40 Cedar Street, Newton. I'm also co-chair of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy. I want to commend Chestnut Hill Towers for having put in a cogeneration system, but that's sort of a second generation technology. It's the maximum energy efficiency that you can get out of a combined heat and power system is about 70%. Heat pumps installed are about 300%. So, and that technology exists for large buildings, and it's relatively straightforward to install. The second point I would like to make is that there is no mandate by the state at this point to do anything, and so it has been suggested, wait around for the state to provide a mandate. Legislation has been stalled in committee. The prior legislation that was meant to produce conversion of gas to electric for homes going forward failed, and we don't see that as coming forward at all. The other point I would like to make is just a matter of numbers. So, for example, 5% of the emissions that are associated with the commercial multifamily is only from 120 buildings. To get the same number from residential would require 3,000 buildings. So we're talking orders of magnitude larger numbers in terms of what needs to be done. Furthermore, if we think about the cost per residential, to convert over completely the heating system and so on for residential for single family, we're probably starting at $20,000 per home, maybe somewhat more. And so we're talking more like $60 million investment to get to the same level of investment, the same level of greenhouse gas reductions that we could at a fraction of that cost just by doing the 120 multifamily dwellings. So the net result is that we're talking about orders of magnitude differences in investments that have to be made. The other point I would like to make is that people keep on talking about what is the total cost of the system. But what's really matters is not the total cost of the system, but what is the difference between the new system and the old system that will certainly have to be put into place. And my point would be that that increment is relatively small. And so if we're talking about how much we would allocate across the 430 units, say it was $2 million more, over the 15 years of the lifetime of the equipment, we're talking about $30 per month over the 15 years, which is a relatively small amount compared to any investment that would be made on a residential site for single-family dwellings. My point is that the economics are all in favor of dealing with multifamily dwellings in this piece of legislation. And you will have a year in which to figure out how to deal with that before the ordinance actually takes effect, actually 3 years before any kind of imposition of a restriction on the level of emissions from such buildings. So the economics are in your favor, and the time is also in your favor by including these buildings.
Okay, the time, thank you very much. We have one other person, I believe, on Zoom. It looks like Denny Stathopoulos. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hope you will correct me.
They're very close. Demi Stathopoulos. Thank you, Chair Baker.
And
yes, 71 Arlington Street in Newton. And I am in support of the comments made by Peter Bearer and Phil Hanser. And I also want to just say that between Newton's Climate Action Plan and the Massachusetts State Climate Action Plan, we are going to have to solve these problems one way or another by 2050. I believe that by starting the process now and getting people thinking about it and working on where they're at by understanding through reporting what the situation is, and then by virtue of what I do believe will be increasing demand across the state, because the state's climate action plan is also calling for net zero carbon emissions by 2050, that we start working our way there. I don't disagree that the costs are going to be there. Both, we are asking single family homeowners to convert to, it's not regulated at this point, but through our climate action plan, that's a clear goal. That's something that we have done in our own home here. So I do believe that by giving homeowners and building owners a pathway, which Newton has made very generous in terms of not requiring the majority of changes until after 2040. We're giving people time to think, plan, and make adjustments. It may be true that these costs are significant relative to what needs to be replaced anyway. And there are more and more innovations being done in terms of building envelope, which I understand is one of the largest concerns of the large building owners. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's bring it back into the chamber. The next speaker I have is Helena Brown.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Helena Brown. I live on 56 Cloverdale Road in the Highlands, and I am a chair emerita of Newton Citizens Commission on Energy. I've been working with the city and with my colleagues on the Energy Commission for more than 3 years on developing Berdo. With 3 minutes, I want to respond to 4 points that were covered in various letters that I had an opportunity to read, letters to the City Council. But let me start with reminding everybody here that the Massachusetts is under legal obligation to cut its carbon emissions by 45% relative to 1990 by 2030, right? We live in Massachusetts and we have a responsibility to contribute to it. And legal obligation to bring it to zero by 2050. I also want to say is that 62% of our electricity from the base service from Eversource is right now coming from renewable sources. And in 5 years, that will be 92%. This great change doesn't do us any good if we don't use this electricity for heating buildings. All right? It's great that we're making progress, and let's make something out of it. Okay, here is my comments in response to some of the issues brought up. One is, it is not fair to buildings that will cost more to convert than other buildings that will cost less, where every single government policy has uneven impacts on those covered by it. This is the nature of policymaking. Just think about when asbestos and lead paint was banned from buildings. Those who had them had to spend a fortune cleaning up those buildings. Others were lucky and they didn't have to do anything. All right? The answer is not to get rid of the policy, but to have provisions for hardships and to have financial incentives to accomplish the goals. And that's what BERDO has, both. Second, impacts on seniors living on fixed incomes. By the way, I'm a senior living on fixed income too. And this is a real concern. But seniors are not the only people in Newton who have this problem. Just
Ms. Brown, your time has expired.
Oh my goodness, give me another 2 minutes.
No, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. You're welcome to submit anything you would like to us in writing, and it will get to the full council as well.
Well, okay. Just think about these young families with big mortgages who are struggling in Newton.
Thank you. Next person, I think, is, it looks like Mr. Hosky Sun. Am I correct? I may be mispronouncing that. If not, let me go to Marcia Cooper. Marcia Cooper here.
Sorry, we didn't hear when you mentioned Huaihe Sun.
I did. There was. It looks like H-A-U-I-H-E Sun, S-O-N. Is that you?
Sun.
Sun.
This gentleman here.
Oh, okay. That's you. Then welcome.
Sorry about that. There was a little mix-up there.
Okay.
My name is Naveed. I am actually a friend of Mr. Sun, and he, because of his kind of English abilities, he asked me to kind of explain his point that he summarized in a couple, pages here. His address is 250 Hammond Pond Parkway, apartment 814N, Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. So some of the points that he brought up are large residential in Newton is by far the minority of residential homes. Again, one of the data points that he brought up was that it's just a little bit over 10%, which is again, minority. There were some other of those here that mentioned previously that towns like Brookline, towns like Cambridge do not target large residential buildings the same way that they feel like they're being targeted here. On top of that, they're being targeted when they're more efficient than single-family homes in terms of energy usage and emissions. So, he was just kind of curious, why are they being targeted first? He feels a little bit like it's not very fair. There's a positive relationship as well between income and emissions. The median home price, for example, is lower for larger residential buildings that consist of condos and those types of units. Generally means the owners are less financially able to bear the costs of changing their system. Again, that's already a more efficient system in the first place. Further, he's just kind of imploring those who can make the decision makers, to think of the residents as another resident mentioned, in the towers, which is that complex that Mr. Sun lives at, many of the residents are retirees. They or have fixed income for another reason, and these are the type of people that are more sensitive to the increased costs that will need to be borne by these types of changes and renovations. So I guess also I get it was explained that just the feeling, right? The optics don't necessarily look very good. Again, versus large homeowners who, again, these types of single-family larger homes, they're less efficient, they waste more energy at a higher rate, and they're owned by those more capable to pay increased costs.
Thank you. I think your time is about up, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Ms. Cooper, please identify yourself again and address.
Thank you, Chair Baker. My name is Marcia Cooper. I live at 170 Evelyn Road in Woburn. I'm actually reading this message on behalf of Marion Knapp, a resident of the towers at Chestnut Hill. Okay. The Newton-Berdo ordinance has potential implications for large residential buildings like the towers of Chestnut Hill, an older building. A petition against including the towers in the ordinance has been signed by many TCH residents, including myself. The petition and related documents suggest that conversion could cost millions of dollars. Feasibility could be difficult because of the building's age, and there could be fines for non-compliance. As I thought about the ordinance and the TCH petition, I realized that I did not fully understand the implications of the ordinance specifically related to the towers. As I began to learn more, it became clearer that I needed more information in order to support or not support the residential portion of the ordinance, specifically the actual costs of conversion, a realistic estimate of monthly or one-time fees for the building and residents, and the real impact and relevance of the tower's new fossil fuel energy equipment. I firmly believe that reducing the impact of fossil fuels is necessary to combat devastating climate change. The question for me is how to do this in the best way possible so as not to put an undue burden on the segments of our population that may be most at risk for negative impacts, older people and those with limited incomes. And that's from Marionette.
Thank you very much. Please, folks, just stand by. Mr. Max Wolf? Mr. Max Wolf is here.
Good evening. I'm Max Wolf with the Charles River Chamber. I want to start by saying that we recognize the urgency of the climate crisis and respect the intentions behind Berdo and the ordinance. That being said, we are concerned about including large residential buildings into the policy. Implementing Berdo does come with costs, and many of those costs will be passed on to the tenants. Given the housing crisis we are facing in Newton and the unaffordability of it, anything that could lead to higher rates of housing prices or displace our workforce is a real concern of ours. Many residents of these large multifamily properties are some of the most economically vulnerable of our neighbors, seniors and other people on fixed incomes. Asking them to shoulder the cost of decarbonization, but not single-family homeowners, is not equitable and will only make it harder for those who are already rent-burdened. We need to strike a balance, doing our part to fight climate change while protecting our most vulnerable residents and keeping Newton as affordable as possible. At a time where we are already challenged to meet our housing needs, we cannot afford to put our existing housing stock at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, folks, again, we all appreciate your appreciation, but we want to get through this. I have one other speaker, I believe, Ming Shan. Is that correct? And again, correct me.
Yeah, dear councilors, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. My name is Ming Shan. I live in 250 Hammond Pond Parkway, the Towers of Chestnut Hills. And I want to bring up some facts, and hopefully all the chancellors could get that point. First is that considering the large residential buildings, by nature, it already saved a lot of energy. So I did a lot of background research and had these facts, and I can provide that. So one of them said single-family houses consumed almost 3 times more energy than apartment with 5 or more units. And the fact is that 61% of the units in the Newton are single-family houses, and 22% are small residential buildings, less than 4 units total. And the large residential buildings only the very, very small percentages, right? And needless to say that by nature, they already saved 3 times more energy. And there's another study saying that there is a strong negative correlation between population density and the per capita emissions in greater Boston areas, which means the more condensed a larger building is, the more energy per capita that was actually saved already, right? And based on the facts that you published on May 28th, the goal was to bring that the large residential buildings emission less than 5%. So less than 5% large residential buildings per unit per capita has less emissions, and it only accounts for 5% of the total emissions in Newton, right? So why we are taking this time and efforts just focusing on this already highly energy efficient and only very, very small percent of all the Newton emissions? That does not make a lot of sense to me. And also some other fact checks. I had a list of all the public information with all the ZEP members, and we can get all the what kind of units you live in. Actually, all 8 of them live in single-family houses. And unfortunately, 3 of them are with gas, 5 with oil, right? None of them with this electricity or any other clean air energy. So I think it's more urgent for the chancellor to thinking about putting regulations to the single-family houses, which produces the largest emissions per unit and per capita, instead of regulating only the residential buildings, which we think would be a discrimination against us, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go online. I have one other speaker, Kathy Pillsbury, please.
Hi, I'm Kathy Pillsbury, 34 Carver Road, Newton Highlands. I just wanted to bring up one thing. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the costs and concern about the impact on low-income seniors. When I was doing some research on Roberto, I came across right in Newton, there's a low-income housing for elders in Nonantum called the Nonantum Village Apartments. They've been going through a deep energy retrofit. They've done a lot to the building. They're now installing solar on their roof, and they have plans, through 2033 to be fully electric. That's one example of how it can be done. There's other examples in the Boston area of much larger properties. In Cambridge, there's one with 300 units. Salem has one 280 units that are all doing deep energy retrofits. So I think these can be done. Maybe there needs to be some more research on that, but it's clearly being worked on. And the costs, my understanding, reading of the ordinance is that the first step is just reporting, which provides a good baseline and in order to kind of develop some metrics for what is already happening. And that the emission standards for residential wouldn't start until 2031, which is 6 years from now. And I don't know what the levels are now, but in Boston, they found that 60% of the buildings already met the first level of emission standards. So I'm sure there's some in Newton that already do. Maybe there needs to be some more research on this, but I definitely think there should be reporting requirements now in order to develop the metrics in order to meet our goals for climate change. And I do believe that by 2031, there will be a lot more changes because there are rapidly making changes in how to heat buildings, how to retrofit buildings, and it's already being done. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that's the end of the list. Anyone who's not been heard that wishes to be heard, if you put your name on the list, then we'll get your. Is there?
You can figure it out. Okay. Hi, my name is Reena Gaurishankar. I live at the Towers, 250 Hammond Pond Parkway. And listening to everyone speak, I think most of the points are covered. I want to thank Ming because he actually made a few points that I was going to bring up. But I just want to bring something up. I had sent an email to the mayor and all the council members actually with my thoughts and concerns. And one of the council members forwarded it to an external entity, and I've been getting emails from them. So one of the comments made to me was that our focus is net zero and to have personal accountability in our lives. And I was told to reflect on personal accountability. So the question I have is, it's a question, I don't think I'll get an answer today, but how many folks on this council, the committee, the Energy Commission, how many of you actually live in these large residential buildings that are impacted by the Berta proposal? Can anyone answer that question now?
I don't think anyone can answer you, but
I know anyone. Okay, so it's just a thought, it's a comment. It's easier to point a finger at others than to actually accept responsibility. But I think everyone's made a really good point here, which is the cost of living is already getting pretty high. This is going to be an added burden on a lot of us, so I hope you will keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a gentleman behind you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dan Rubin, 175 Auburn Street. I'm the chair of Green Newton, and I'm representing Green Newton tonight. I'm here to advocate for Berto, including for residential. The length of time, there's plenty of time to achieve these goals. The biggest expense is electrification, and it will be a long time before electrification is required. So I believe it is quite reasonable. I do understand that Berto is a burden on property owners, but the big burden, the real big burden, is on our children if we fail to act on climate change. UN Secretary General Guterres said that global temperatures keep rising. Our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate change irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. Look at recent climate news. Record rainfall devastated Asheville, North Carolina, killing 100. Record rainfall devastated Valencia, Spain, killing 200. Florida hurricanes have sharply increased insurance costs, forcing many people to leave Florida. The historic drought in the Northeast has caused record wildfires in Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. And 2024 will yet again be another hottest year on record. Science tells us that we will continue to face worse and worse climate catastrophes. Newton's a leader in several respects. City Council has been a leader in several respects, as has Mayor Fuller. Yet climate change demands that we do more. When Newton act, others follow. If we follow the lead of Cambridge and Boston, then others will follow us and our impact will multiply. Many citizens of my generation and older dismiss climate change action or minimize it. Yet the odds, yes, the odds are that many of us will die before climate change shatters our lives. but the odds are so much worse for young people and middle-aged people. Let's keep them in mind. President Obama said we are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation that could do something about it. Let's not fail our young citizens. Let's pass BERDO, including for large residential projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I saw one other person signed up.
Hi, my name is Hong Zhang. I'm a resident of the Towers. So I need to take some of your precious time to express myself. So
No, if you don't mind, ma'am, just talk to the mic because we're recording you.
Okay. So thanks for the previous gentleman's poetic words. I think everyone is seeing the environmental getting changed recently. But however, whether it caused by the human being, it's maybe still a question mark because we are in the end of the fourth ice age. That means the weather is supposed to be changing. It's getting warmer because the ice age is ending. So what? It is really because of our emission or anything human contribute. Maybe not. Our mother planet is getting its own cycle of its temperature, its weather. So I really don't think there's real scientific research has proof that it's everything is due to the human beings. The second, I received some letters from the councilor saying that the city council saying that Eversource has 67% of the electricity coming from the renewable source. However, based on the data, the most recent data, IOS in New England showing that throughout the New England, the renewable source of electricity only occupy 11%. That means in order for Eversource to keep the 67% renewable electricity source, it has very limited choice to select the electricity generator. That may be why our electricity price is getting so high in the past 3 years. It increased 30%. So as the electrification goes on, we will see that the price of electricity and the reliability it's unpredictable to our homeowners. So I don't think we should take such a radical changes to all the buildings before the technology is really ready.
Excuse me, ma'am, your time is up.
Okay, I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? If not, I thank you all for your attendance and participation, and I'm going to bring the conversation back into the committee and the members of the council who are here to discuss it. Let me just indicate that, as I said at the outset, we have 3 versions that the law department has prepared for us for consideration. The way we left it last time was that residential was included in the straw vote of the committee. It was not a unanimous recommendation, but that's where we were. So I want to open it up for members of the council on the committee and otherwise for discussion. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank everybody for coming, for speaking, for writing letters, and for participating in this very important issue. I want to make sure to thank the Law Department, the Planning Department, Helena Brown, and the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy. and everyone else who has thought about this enough to participate and write or speak or let us know your feelings on this. Here are a few things that we need to consider as we decide on this. And I also hope that tonight we can choose an option of Berto. We have 3 that we can all get on board with and support and pass so that we can pass this at the full council on Monday night. It's time that we act. We need to move ahead. So we know that 90% of existing buildings are still going to be here in 2050 when the Commonwealth and Newton have committed to reach 0 greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need to find a way to convert sooner or later. And this, several people spoke on this, and thank you. Technology, as we know, is moving steadily ahead. And while there are only 2 companies currently that offer conversion packages for residential buildings or all buildings that heat with forced hot water, in the future, as some people have said, we do expect more. The technology will improve and the prices will go down. Steam systems are far more complicated, and there apparently is, from what I understand, not a really good way to convert steam. So why not single-family units first? If we look at price, we have a better idea of the cost of single-family conversions to all electric than we have of multifamily conversions. HVAC conversions for single-family homes typically cost between $10,000 and $30,000. I think the number that was put out tonight was $20,000. So we've got a ballpark for them. And this is after subtracting the generous savings from Mass Save. It is true that we need to address emissions from single-family homes, but looking first at the challenges of large residential buildings seems to be the more sensible approach. The city and the Citizens Commission on Energy have been working on Berto for 5 years, and the City Council has been working on it for a year. We want to make the financial burden on building owners and residents as low as possible, and phasing in gradually so that building owners will have ample time to plan for when their fossil fuel systems fail. To that end, and since no one today knows the real costs involved, the only way that we will know is to do a careful and thorough study of data. And in order to have the data, we have to gather the data. And the utility companies are willing to help us and building owners with this data. The building owner submits the data. The utility companies have the software to be able to convert that data into how many kilowatt hours, et cetera, how many pounds or tons of carbon emissions, et cetera, so that we have a good idea both of what the cost would be for what we're looking at. So after discussion since the last meeting, we've come up with and will support option B, which includes the reporting and reduction for non-residential and reporting only for large residential, so that we can begin without any delay to collect the large residential data that we need in order to understand the feasibility or not of conversion of the different kinds of buildings, of multifamily residential buildings. We appreciate all of the letters urging the city council to include or not include large residential in our Berto ordinance. But while they urged us one way or another, that's not data. And without data, an informed decision cannot be made. So option B will begin to give us that data that everyone agrees is needed. I hope you'll agree that option B will take the pressure off of compliance concerns for the large residential buildings while allowing us to begin collecting the data that we need in order to examine residential buildings. And this afternoon I had, or during the day, I had some very productive conversations with many of the stakeholders in the city. Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Riebman included. Mr. Riebman is the executive director of the Charles River Chamber of Commerce. And I think that we've got a very viable pathway forward. And I'd like to ask through the chair if Mr. Ferguson could give his thoughts on our conversation that we had today. Thank you very much.
Before he does, let me just see who other members of the committee. Is that agreeable? And Mr. Ferguson, can you respond about what Councilor Danberg has indicated, which involves requiring the energy reduction for commercial buildings, but for residential reporting only, what that means? And yes, yeah. Because I think it'd be helpful for the public as well as our colleagues.
So I've been talking to many counselors over the last couple of weeks in particular, getting very good, I think, constructive input on trying to find ways that we can get a Berto ordinance approved. And first, let me say, all that input has been very constructive and helpful. But I think that the key at this point for us to implement a Berto ordinance is we need to get to the implementation phase. We've spent a lot of time developing the ordinance, discussing it in these council meetings. That's all been important discussion, but it's time for us to get to the implementation phase, which means we need to have some version of Berto passed soon. So after talking to Councilor Danberg today and other councilors, I feel like we are ready and willing to support the option B, which is the commercial buildings or non-residential buildings, plus reporting only for residential buildings, leaving out the emissions standard. So that's our position now in order to try to get this moved through this committee and the council would be to support that option. We feel like it provides some good benefits by having the data available to do some better analysis and come up with a viable plan for either a Berto amendment down the road or programs that are designed for the large residential sector or both. So that data would be welcome planning data for us to have available.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Just so members of the public and our committee will understand, when we would talk about option B requiring a reporting, what is the nature of the reporting requirement? Because that is a requirement, it's not an option. Just can you describe that for everyone?
Sure. The reporting, so all buildings, residential buildings, 20,000 square feet and above would submit annual energy reports through the Energy Star Portfolio Manager platform, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you not, but it's a platform that's been around for a couple of decades. It's commonly used for benchmarking of buildings. It's sponsored by the US EPA. We would be providing training in how to use that platform. And we would also be, we also have been working with the utilities really for a couple of years now, talking about Birdo. And one of the main things we have worked on with them is access to data for building owners. And they have set up portals on their websites so that building owners can get access to data. They have agreed to come in and also provide training on that, on how to access utility data through both Eversource for electricity and National Grid for gas. We're actually working on a memorandum of understanding with both utilities, and part of that MOU would be for them to provide 4 to 6 training sessions a year. So I think we'll be able to give you or give owners of all buildings that are covered by Birdo, but in particular the residential building owners, all the support they need. And the first report under this Plan B of the ordinance would be due September 2026 for calendar year 2025 energy use. So there's plenty of time to learn, take advantage of our training, and be in a good position to be able to start submitting these reports. And we'll all learn from them. You'll learn too, because you'll find out how you compare to other buildings, for instance.
Mr. Ferguson, just again to press on a little bit more in detail, we all get, I think, an electric bill or a gas bill at home that tells us not just the cost, but what amount of electricity we use or how many units of gas we use. Is that what you're being asked, the building owners are asked to share with the city? I just want to be clear on how burdensome is it to do this?
They don't share bills.
Not bills, but usage. Just
they enter usage, essentially usage that's shown on those bills. So in the simplest situation, if you're which doesn't apply to multifamily, but just kind of as an example, if you happen to have one gas meter and one electric meter, you would have actually 12 months of energy use data on each bill. So you wouldn't even need anything other than 2 bills if you happen to have only 2 accounts. But of course, multifamily buildings are likely to have at least multiple electricity accounts. And that data is what would be available through the portal. That's probably the toughest data to get. And Eversource actually came and spoke at one of these hearings about the portal and their plans to help us. So they bought in, and so has National Grid. So I think that'll be a big help getting us over the hump on data.
okay. Thank you. Councilor Albright, have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one quick question about the reporting. Is this the kind of reporting that would be done by the facility manager, the superintendent who spoke here tonight, or does everybody in their own unit have to do some reporting?
No, a facility manager could do it. It could be done centrally. I mean, and Eversource would be providing access to all the electricity information. And they don't provide bill information, so it's, the information is anonymous. It's just use data. It doesn't associate it with a customer or an account. It's just the numbers. There's no way to associate it with a particular account, but they will provide the aggregate data for all the electricity accounts in a building.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I wanted to say was that I think I'm also in support of this option B, that last week, an interesting project came before the Affordable Housing Trust to see whether there was any interest in it being funded by the Affordable Housing Trust. And it's the conversion of some existing multifamily housing in Newton. And he's on a very, very, very tight budget, trying to, put some of his own money and some of the Affordable Trust money, some state money, put a package together. And I asked him about Berto, and he was worried that that could push him out of the ability to be able to put this project together. So I think maybe we do have to think a little bit longer about the implementation part of it for residential, but I would be in favor of the reporting for residential.
Anyone else? Councilor Albright. Excuse me, Councilor Leary. I beg your pardon, I just did Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I have a question for clarification for Mr. Ferguson about the reporting for electricity.
Yes.
Because we want to electrify, and already many, if not everybody, but many Newton residents are already using 100% renewable electricity. Is that going to be also just in terms of simplicity? Are you going to require the continuing monitoring of and reporting of electrical use, or going forward? I just wanted to be sure, because the point is to electrify too, right? So.
Yeah, we're going to ask for reporting of electricity use, even though our ordinance exempts electricity from the emission standard. So any commercial building that's subject to the ordinance, it would be only for fossil fuel use, which is essentially gas and oil. The electricity use is not part of the emissions ordinance.
So I guess that's where I was a little bit confused. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, since I will be voting on this in full committee, I did want to say that I really do support the comments, many of the comments I heard tonight, but particularly Ms. Brown, Ms. Pillsbury, and Mr. Rubin. When I first ran for office in 2013, it was because climate change kept me up at night, and I had 2 small kids, and I do see it as a real threat to our community. We've already seen huge costs that have been already mentioned due to climate impacts, the terrible things that have happened in North Carolina, in Florida, in Spain, and many others. And I do want to ask this committee to please pass this Berto now. I'd be willing to do option B as well. I think it's critically important that we implement this and get started, because we have no time to waste. Every year will be the hottest year ever going forward. At the rate we're going, parts of the planet will start to be unlivable, and certainly people will be impacted by the huge costs from these climate catastrophes that we're seeing more and more. So please, let's start this now. Let's implement the Part B, and I think moving forward, with all the things that I've been learning while following this, we have the capacity and the ability and the technology to move ahead. And people need to remember, we're talking, many, many years ahead. Most people who do nothing today in residential buildings will still be in compliance by 2030. But we need to plan for the future, and let's start tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the committee? Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a lot of people to thank for the fact that this ordinance is in such good shape and has been drafted so well, and so much work has been put into it. And I particularly want to thank Councilor Danberg for thanking all those people. Saved me the time, so thank you. What we're discussing largely is the inclusion of the large residential properties into this ordinance. I think we discussed that at our last meeting. I don't remember the exact vote, but I know there were a couple of us who thought it wasn't a great idea at that time. Maybe a couple of us who were very, very bright and wise, but I don't remember exactly who that was. What I will say is that I think, Councilor Leary, to your point, I think you're right. And I think the environment is a huge concern, and we have to do our part to address climate change. We all should be working on that, and we should be certainly incentivizing each and every one of our residents to do their share to counteract the impacts. I believe that including the large residential properties at this time would be more punitive on them and would negatively impact the efforts we've all made to try and control the rising cost of housing. And as many have pointed out, it wouldn't actually have immediate impact because it's so many years in the future that these actions are going to be taken. So at this point, I'm not prepared to include those properties into the ordinance. I think I could perhaps be persuaded to include those properties for the purposes of reporting, to help gain the data if it's not overly burdensome on them and it's not going to, in and of itself, start increasing the rents on those individuals. That would be beneficial. But if we're going to just be raising rents and increasing the cost of housing on the people who it impacts the most and who are so volatile in terms of their ability to afford their housing, that's not something I'm prepared to support. So I'll listen to more of the debate, but at this point, I think I still see the wisdom in beginning with the commercial properties and going from there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I just associate myself with the remarks of the councilor from Ward 4 who just spoke. Councilor Oliver, the councilor from Ward a councilor from Ward 4. Councilor Oliver and then Councilor Wright.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure you can actually bestow upon yourself the esteemed title, but I'm all for it. I'm all for it. That's great. I think we heard a lot of really good comments tonight from the public. I always learn something when we open up those microphones and let people give us 3 minutes of their thoughts. So thank you for that. I think it's fair to say that this ordinance has been and continues to be, I think I heard somebody say, I think it was Councilor Leary, this is the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night. My phone has certainly been ringing quite a bit over the past few weeks because of these three options in front of us. I too believe that we need to, not just Newton, but the state of Massachusetts, this country, this globe, we've got a lot of work to do, and we better get started. 2050 is, last I checked, roughly 25 plus years out, but that's going to seem like tomorrow when it comes to replacing boilers, heating systems in your own homes. I'm lucky enough that I'm probably going to have to do that in the next 18 months, so yay me. Oh, and by the way, I forget who mentioned this out on that side of the rail, but not only is my home actually electrified with 3 heating pumps already and an electric vehicle in the driveway, but now my entire furnace is shot, and it will be 100% electric really, really soon. So if anybody wants to know how that process works with Mass Saves, I will probably be able to help you out there. All that said, I want to put my my support behind option B here. We need to make progress, folks. The simple fact is, this is a burden that everyone is going to face. The question is when. That's it. It doesn't matter, it does not matter what your income is, what your rent is. It's coming for everybody. Sooner or later, it's coming for everybody. It's not an excuse. It's not a mandate. It's not some way to justify the prioritization of how we go about getting it done. It's just the simple fact that this is going to be costly for everyone. And we know that. And we know, like several of us had a conversation before we got rolling tonight, we know that today the technologies that we need don't exist right now. We know that. There are multiple books written about it, but they're coming, and there are people working on them. Whether or not you believe it's cold fusion, nuclear energy sources or something else that I haven't even read about yet. They're out there. The grid itself needs a fair amount of work as well. But I do want to kind of shift away from that for a minute and get back to something that's really going to be, and I apologize for this, but it's going to be completely inside baseball. I have an amendment that I would like to propose, regardless of which version ZAP decides to move forward with.
So let me suggest, as a matter of process, let's get discussion on the option B first and then come back to you. Is that agreeable?
Any way that you want to handle
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Let's just see if other members, I think Councilor Wright wanted to be heard.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with pretty much most of the people here in ZAP. I think we need the data. And so option B is the way that I'm leaning towards right now, is we do it for commercial and get the data on residential. And that will inform us, and it also will inform the others. I have some questions or concerns on another part of the commission. I don't know if you want to talk about that later or now.
This is the advisory commission?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hold that for a minute. Let's just see if we can get through option B or which main option, then come back to the details, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on the main item? Councilor Getz. Those of you who are here tonight, thank you very much. Just so that those who are leaving and those who are still here, what is being discussed is for residential use, a reporting requirement that Mr. Ferguson indicated, but not at the moment a requirement to actually expend funds to upgrade the facilities. So just so you understand what's up. Councilor Getz.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. I actually have had quite a few productive conversations during the week with Mr. Ferguson and the Attorney Lee. And I'm very appreciative of their time, you know, in terms of getting me to a better understanding of what of Birdo. I'm supportive of the option B at this moment, and I also think of it as we need the data, but more importantly, we need to understand that there are 5 communities that are actually implementing something like this. So we will be one of the new municipalities moving forward with this, but as everybody is suggesting, we're running out of time. And that's very disconcerting for me, because I think that there's going to be years of trying to get this, the regulations in place, and to have standards within those regulations that will be of benefit in the community. So I think that it's really important to get started. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wish to be heard? I'd like to take it as a sense of the committee so far that option B is the one we'd like to work on. Does anyone wish to work on any of the other options? If not, I'm going to, excuse me, Councilor Block, you want to be heard?
Thank you.
Councilor Labowitz, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of the committee.
No, but
so
you're welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity just to say a couple of words. I've been following Birdo from afar, and when I heard that the committee at its last discussion of this had taken a straw poll and by a vote of 6-2 had indicated they wanted to include residential buildings over 20,000 square feet, that drew me here tonight. And I want to say more explicitly what Councilor Krinsman alluded to, that it was he and you, Chair Baker, that were the minority of 2. And I was distressed that it was only the 2 out of the 8 of you that thought about it that way. I'm really heartened to hear the discussion tonight, and of course, the members of the public who have, I think, helped all of us understand what's going on. I just have to say that, Yes, option B is probably where we're headed, and that's probably the right place to be, but let's not delude ourselves. This is actually going to start affecting people right away. It's not going to take 20 years or 25 years, but rents are going to start going up right away because any building owner has to anticipate that there are going to be significant costs down the line, and they've got to start raising the money now. So if people complain to us about their rents going up, that's something we need to own up to. It may be necessary as a society for us to do this. I appreciate what Councilor Oliver said in the clearest terms. The costs are coming for us, but there are people who can afford it more than others. And I just need to say we have more than one social goal in this city besides reducing our carbon emissions. We talk about trying to preserve affordable housing and create affordable housing, having a diverse community. Well, this is going to run against that. So what do we do about that? How do we balance that? And I still haven't heard strategies for that. But taking it slower on residential is a really good first step. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Count, please. Thank you. Councilor Lebovitz.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo the comments of Councilor Block. I was going to say he took the words right out of my mouth, and I also am quite relieved. It seems like the major theme, other than the fact that we have a generational commitment to this, is the concern about finances. And I think that my understanding is that no matter what's passed tonight in the ordinance, there is a section on hardships. And I was wondering if Mr. Ferguson could comment particularly on what does it mean to have a financial hardship? Has that been defined? And if it hasn't been, how would we move forward with a definition of that? Thank you.
Mr. Ferguson, you can respond.
Yeah, developing regulations for the hardship compliance plan has not begun yet. And there's been some thinking about it at a high level. We realize we do have to come up with criteria for financial hardship. That's for certain, and especially relative to the residential sector that we've been discussing tonight. So that will be done after the ordinance passes. We do have some language in the some new language in the ordinance about the review committee. I forget what we call it now. The asbestos advisory committee, I guess, is what we're calling it, to help develop regulations. And we're going to need a lot of input on that. So it's really good to have that committee. I would say it's, we would have had a committee anyway, but now it's in the ordinance, it's formal. But we've developed the whole Burdo ordinance with a committee, including people that spoke tonight, Helena Brown, Phil Hansa, Michael Gavelbas here, Dan Rubin from Green Newton. They were all part of the development of the Burdo ordinance, and we'll be looking to people like them on this advisory committee to help develop the regulations as well.
I would just encourage the committee to listen to the people who have spoken about their concern about the financial burden and take them seriously in terms of their concern and accommodate that in some way. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for everyone's information, the language Mr. Ferguson talked about for an advisory commission is 7 members appointed by the mayor with the approval of the city council to serve without compensation. and the advisory commission shall have expertise in environmental justice, affordable housing, labor and workers' rights, workforce development, building engineering and energy, real estate development and management, public health and hospitals, architecture and historic preservation, or any combination thereof. So the idea is to get a broad range of experience available to the city in implementing this ordinance. Any other comments? Councilor Leary, you've spoken. I'd just like to make sure that I recognize people who haven't been heard from yet. Councilor Farrell, welcome to the committee. Councilor Farrell from Ward 8.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo Council's Block and Leibovitz. We all recognize that this is an issue that that all of us, it's right, but the all of us is this entire country and the world, that we all must pay attention to. At the same time, we cannot forget that $30 a month extra in rent is not insignificant to many, many people. And we have to keep that in our mind while we try to attack this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councilor Leary, I'll come to you in a second, but I just want to get a sense of the committee. Are we, members of the committee, are we agreeable that option B is what we're going to discuss? Okay. And now I want to just go to, is your comment on the main item or to a specific, we're going to go to the two sub-issues for a moment in a moment. But
It's on the main item.
okay, go ahead.
Just from the recent comments that I've been hearing, I would, and this is a request from Mr. Ferguson, that we should also, everyone's cognizant of costs, and we have to be
I'm
realistic.
sorry, I just couldn't hear that last sentence.
I think we all have to be aware of any potential cost impacts or unexpected expenses. But we also realize that staying on fossil fuels has a cost. Natural gas has gone up almost 8% just this year, and projections for it to get more expensive continue to rise, particularly since as more and more people get off natural gas, you'll have fewer and fewer ratepayers who will be covering the enormous costs of that infrastructure. And an energy efficient home is more inexpensive to run. The utilities are less. In some cases with net zero or people that have solar panels in addition, they're paying no utilities. So there are those benefits as well. And I just want to make sure we have all that information, because I don't think staying with the status quo is something we can keep with. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's go to, just to clarify, Councilor Oliver, you have a first question. You have an amendment, and then I'll come to Councilor Wright.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I believe it's in the exact same area that Councilor Wright was going to be commenting on. But my proposed amendment would deal with, see, what is this, so that everybody can follow along. This is 1I3.
What page? You start
Oh,
you're talking about the.
Well, that's a much quicker way to get there, isn't there? I guess I'm not the esteemed counselor tonight. Okay, we're talking page 10 of the amendment. I don't know if that's necessarily
Okay,
the
this
package.
is just to direct members. I know members of the public can't see this unless you have a computer and go online, but we're talking about option B. There's page 10 where there's a reference to I is the Berto Advisory Commission.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I gave you the page number from option A, but they're the same in all three
Yes.
options. So
Okay.
look at A, but it's going to be in B as well. My bad. There goes the steamed again. Okay, so my recommendation here, my recommended amendment would be the Berto Advisory Commission shall consist of not more than 7 members, half appointed by the mayor, half appointed by the city council president, and shall serve without compensation. And the rest of that section regarding the advisory commission can stay intact. What that could mean is there could be 6. I don't know if there was any magic to the number no more than 7. I don't know if it was 6 or it could be 8, but I would recommend that it's half-half city council appointed and the other half coming from the mayor's office.
Well, the proposal in the ordinance so far is for 7 members, and I think that's just to have a tiebreaker if there's any question.
Well, actually, sir, it doesn't say 7. It says not more than 7.
I understand.
So 6 or 7, and if it's 7, then we'll split the baby in half, and it'll have to be a joint recommendation.
So I guess what I'm saying is, would you be willing to say that half the members of the commission, but no more than 3, or I'm trying to figure out which half goes which way, or the city council?
I will point out that there are 8 members in this committee and 24 city councilors, and we managed to come up with uneven votes all the time.
We do plenty of times.
Yeah, we do it all the time.
If you want to amend the ordinance to make it 8 people, I'm perfectly happy to go there, but I just want to I want to understand the thrust of the amendment. You basically would like half of whatever, but it may be impossible to have half, so I'm just trying to.
So let's try this. My amendment should read 6 members, which is still in keeping with the no more than 7. So 6 members, 3 from city council, 3 from the mayor's office.
So there's an amendment proposed to change the reference in item 2. It says, so it would read that Berto Advisory Commission consists of not more than 7 members, half of whom appointed by the mayor with the approval of the city council and half appointed by the president of the council. Well, I assume with the approval of the council, right? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the council has to approve in both cases, just the nominator is different. Okay? So, and do you want to speak to the nature of the reason for your amendment?
Certainly. I think that it is fairly apparent in all the conversations that I've had with counselors, with other members of the public familiar with Berto, that the importance of the role of the regulations is central to the success of the program. And on an ongoing basis, I believe that the function that the regulations provide is something that should not be undertaken by one individual. That's why we have an advisory commission in the first place. And it does seem to me that that same principle applies to anyone who would be responsible for appointing said commission. I would much prefer to see that be a body of individuals who are appointing that commission.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask I see some members of the committee who want to be heard on this, but Councilor Wright, you were the first person who wanted to raise questions. Is this responsive to your concern, or is there a different concern?
This is one of a few. I agree with Councilor Oliver that not all 7 should be appointed by the mayor. Well, 6 now, but yes, I prefer the 7, but that's okay. But then I have some other ones, but
all right, let me come back to it. I just want to.
But I agree that we should split this.
Okay. All right, just want to be clear. I didn't want to. We'll come back to you for your other items. Now, I think I have Councilor Getz, Councilor Danberg, Councilor Albright.
I actually
on this
correct
question. Yeah.
On this one specific, and I support Councilors Oliver's and Councilor Wright in the 6. I actually would prefer it being 9. An odd number, and I'm looking at Boston, in terms of the number of people on their body. But I also believe one of those positions could be an alternate. But here we go with splitting, meaning half appointed by the city council and half being appointed by the city council president and the other half by the mayor. So my preference, I completely support splitting the nomination and appointment between the mayor and the city council, but I actually believe that the body should be a larger body and potentially 9 members.
Well, let's take it one at a time, though. We're dealing right now with composition, if you don't mind. We can come back to size as the next item. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you. I too support Councilor Oliver's idea that we have a split, that the mayor appoint a certain number and that the city council appoint a certain number. I too, along with Councilor Getz, believe that 6 is not enough, and I think that 7 would be a better number. I have always believed in the wisdom of having an odd number of people on a committee. And I would add an amendment that I would ask Councilor Oliver if he would be friendly to, and that would be that regardless of whether it's the mayor that appoints the extra or the city council that appoints the extra, that's not something that's not a mountain I would die on. But I would ask that the city council be the final vote, have the final vote on the approval of all, whatever number we pick.
Thank you, Councilor Albright, on the amendment.
Sorry, I think it's a good idea to share this responsibility. A suggestion has been made that what about, we do have this model in some of our commissions that one member could be appointed from the Citizens Energy Commission and one member could be appointed from Green Newton. They participated and they could end up as one of the members nominated, but maybe we should think about the Energy Commission and Green Newton appointing a member as well, if you're interested in that, Councilor Oliver.
So, Councilor Oliver, let me recognize you.
Sorry, the esteemed Councilor Oliver from Ward 1 concurs. I think we could go 4 from the council, 4 from the mayor's office, 1 from NCCE. Makes all the sense in the world to me.
So we're now 9, or you want to stay at 7?
I heard 9. I can live with 9. I can live with 4, 4, and 1.
I would prefer us not to have a bidding war, but just have a decision.
Oh yes, that's fair.
You tell me what you want, and I would be glad to.
So I'm amending my amendment. 9 members of the advisory commission, 4 recommended from or coming from the city council president, 4 coming from the mayor's office, 1 coming from NCCE, love that idea, all of them to be voted on by the city council or approved by the city council.
What about the one from Green Newton? I suggested 2.
What? I'm sorry, let me just recognize you before we
Yeah, I
get
just
into back and
didn't want
forth.
the thought that I had put forward to get lost. There was 1 from the Citizens Energy and 1 from Green Newton. Each of them would have 1.
So now we're back to an even number.
My suggestion, just if I can interject as a
Hey,
suggestion.
I'm listening to all suggestions.
Is that you stay with an odd number and that you have 4 from the city council, 4 from the mayor, and 1 from the energy commission. All confirmed by the city council, okay?
I'm amenable to that, that's fine. That makes sense
I want to
me.
move the process along.
I can't imagine that Green Newton would be overlooked in the first 8 to start with.
Remember that the ordinance still would require different expertise, and I just want to make sure that that's.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
The
that.
ordinance still would require varied expertise. That you're not leaving that out. Okay, so let me get a sense of the committee. We can vote on it as an amendment, but let me just get a sense. Does anyone disagree with what Councilor Oliver's amendment has now become, which is 9, 4 and 4, and 1? All right, anybody disagree? So let's consider that as, oh, excuse me. Councilor Getz, you disagree.
I noticed Andrew Lee had his hand up.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Let me recognize Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a note that's now moot because Green Newton isn't part of it, but the Newton Energy Commission is a city commission while Green Newton is an unaffiliated nonprofit. That's all.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear that clearly. You were speaking clearly, but I didn't hear it clearly.
The Newton Energy Commission is a city entity. It's a city commission while Green Newton is a non-city entity, and it's a
oh yes,
it's a
no, but we're
just
speaking
wanted
only
that note.
Yeah, but we're only speaking about the Energy Commission, I think, at the moment. Okay, thank you. All right, so I take it that that is option B with that modification is what's before us. Now, back to you, Councilor Wright.
So many of my questions were answered during that discussion. I saw that we have a list of different experiences, and I'm a little concerned that requiring at least one technical person on that group. One of them was historic preservation. We wouldn't want 9 people of historic preservation on this commission, which I don't think it would happen, but requiring at least one technical person on that, I think would be good. How long is this commission going to be together?
Mr.
It's
Ferguson?
currently set up, I can answer that question, Mr. Chair. It's currently set up so that it's active until the actual establishment of the regulations.
And what is your guess? A year? 3 months?
I'll defer to Mr. Ferguson on that.
Do I use the mic, Mr. Ferguson? I'm sorry.
I think it could be 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Getz.
I actually, Chair, I'm interested in this section in 4, upon the establishment of the regulations, the Bird Advisory Commission shall dissolve. And I think it's important for us to think this through and to think about the implementation, because I think there's going to be quite a bit of transition. And I think as an advisory body, I think it's important to have them in continuance through a certain time period, an implementation time period. So my amendment would be to include that. It's beyond the establishment. It's the establishment and implementation of the regulation, and you can define that time period. Once they've been established, I think it's probably a 2-year time period that I would like to see in place for the implementation.
So let me just clarify with Councilor Wright. Was there anything else you had? I just want to try and... So the question is whether the commission should survive the regulations for a period of time. Recognize that this is maybe a 5-year term, which is a long period to ask anybody to serve. So I just didn't know whether you had any sense about that. We want people to be willing to. Mr. Ferguson, do you want to?
You know, I think it's going to be a good 2 years to actually write the first phase of the regulations. What I can see happening here is as we get into the implementation of the ordinance, we run into more issues or more situations that might require reconvening of this advisory group rather than just have it around for a long period of time, have the option of reconvening as needed. But I think the initial term would be 2 to 3 years, somewhere in there, whatever the council thinks is best.
So the idea here is that at least there should be a term through the implementation of the regulation. Is 1 year beyond that period of time sufficient, Councilor Getz?
I think that's sufficient.
All right. So would it be consistent with your intent? And Mr. Lee, will depend on you to draft the language to affect this if it's the will of the committee, that the commission would exist to the establishment of the regulations, but asked to serve for an additional year. And it's always open to the administration to bring an amendment to us at any time, if that's appropriate, to extend the life of any commission. But I just want to get a sense of the committee. Anyone disagree with that? I'll come to Councilor Leary in a moment. You're not a member of the committee. I just want to see where the committee is. Okay, I don't see any dissent from the idea of the commission being persisting for at least a year, or for a year beyond the establishment of the regulations. Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to bring up, when the city was moving towards the trash carts back in 2009, the Solid Waste Commission at the time was integral in working on that, doing the pilot, and eventually, as we all know, the city implemented the cart system, automated cart system. And then it disappeared for several years, and I remember working on getting it reconstituted because there were a lot of other issues around recycling solid waste and such. And so it became the Sustainable Materials Management Commission. And to this day, I believe that's one of our most effective, efficient commissions, and they do a report every year, and I found their information really invaluable. So I could see how, with a complicated thing like Birdo, that we would want to continue to have a group of people, a commission that would be working on that and not be too quick to sunset it.
Okay. But for the moment, the proposal before the committee is that we would have a 9-member commission, not half, 4 appointed by the mayor, 4 appointed by the city council, 1 appointed by the Energy Commission, all approved by the city council, that would last through the implementation for an additional year. That's basically what is before the committee. Is that agreeable? So is there any other item or issue that members of the committee would like to discuss? Councilor Albright.
I don't think we settled the Newton Wellesley Hospital issue yet, and I do have some questions for Mr.
I'm sorry,
Ferguson.
which issue?
Newton Wellesley Hospital.
Oh, no, at the moment, the ordinance includes a provision for Newton Wellesley Hospital, but not what the hospital itself requested at the end.
I understand, but I'd like to settle the matter, and I have some questions for Mr. Ferguson about it.
All right. So let's just, have we established the advisory group to the satisfaction of members of the committee? So let's go to the question of Newton Wellesley Hospital. Go ahead, Councilor Albert.
Okay. So in a couple of places in the Newton Wellesley Hospital's letter, they implied that that we will come back to them at some point in time and say, no, you can't use gas anymore. And there is another place where you said, I think maybe both said, that gas would continue on as long as it's needed as a secondary source. So I just wanted to clarify that. Is there any chance that at some point in the near future, or even in the far future, maybe the very far future you would say it, but that you're going to say, no, you can't use gas anymore?
Our priority is to make sure the hospital meets its federal regulatory requirements. If that means they have to use gas, then they'll be able to use gas.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that was the biggest one, but just let me check through my notes here. No, it's all my issues were about this secondary source of, because that seemed to be a recurring theme in their letter, that they're afraid that someday we're going to cut off their gas. And you're saying that as long as federal regulations require a secondary source, that gas would be allowed.
Yeah, as long as they need gas to meet those requirements, including the secondary source, then we'd be open to that option. Yes.
Okay, I think that's important. I just want to recognize Councilor Kalis, who has not had a chance to speak, the Vice President.
I'd just like to, on the hospital, and I'll stay on the hospital, Mr. Ferguson, and maybe Mr. Stearns can help out here. In the letter from the hospital, they detailed out the comparison between Birdo in Boston and Birdo in Newton. Your contention is that because in Boston, the hospitals there are following Birdo, that the hospital here should. Is that right?
That's part of it, but we've provided an exemption in our language that Boston doesn't, which is an exemption for microgrids or other systems defined by regulation. There might be others. They have referred to having other options, but they haven't been specific. So we left it in the ordinance that we would be open to other systems, which will be defined by regulation once the hospital knows what direction they want to go in with other systems.
Okay, so it just concerns me that we're basing decisions, I mean, the hospital clearly doesn't think it's apples to apples comparison. And that's very concerning to me, especially when then the fallback is kind of squishy as well, meaning they can come to you with different options. You'll be able to decide one or the other. So it just doesn't feel like we're there.
Well, Boston Berdo is also being implemented through hardship regulations. And those require the submittal of a hardship plan by the hospital, which I'm not sure if they've done that yet, but we're offering that pathway as well, the same pathway as Boston, where the hospital, one of the things the hospital likes to mention is that in Boston, electrical emissions is part of the Boston ordinance. In Newton, it is not part of the Boston or Newton ordinance. In Boston, they can buy virtual power purchase agreements or enter into virtual power purchase agreements for RECs that come from outside the region, and they can use that to offset their electricity RECs. So that's something that they consider a good feature in Boston, but it's not even required in Newton. They don't have to go and enter into a VPPA to meet their electrical emissions in Newton, because we don't include it in our admission standards. So that's, I think, one of the differences that gets confusing, but it really, doesn't really have any bearing on complying with the Newton ordinance. And the other thing they mentioned in their letter is they buy power off of a steam, electricity, and power plant called Maytep in Boston. They're a customer of Maytep. They also have their own cogeneration plants in Boston. We're giving them the option with our exemption to put in cogeneration if they think that's their best option to meet the secondary power requirement. That's an option they mentioned at one point. They mentioned they have it in Boston, and it's not exempt in Boston, but we're making it exempt in Newton.
So you're basically saying you think that that Berdo is more flexible than what's offered in Boston for the hospital?
Yeah, I think it's more flexible. Also, it's important, I think, to note that the hospital is in compliance with Newton Berdo through 2038. So there's plenty of time for them to develop plans and for us to work together with the hospital.
But so is the towers. I mean, it's conflating, but we just took a vote on the towers as well, and they're in until 2038 as well.
Right.
So I don't really. I mean, Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if we can hear from the hospital as well.
No, I'm not going to allow that because I offered a public comment opportunity and nobody from the hospital.
No, excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, Mr. Stearns, you're not recognized. I beg your pardon.
At the outset of the meeting, you announced that you were going to address
Excuse me,
the
Mr.
alternatives for multifamily and then the hospital. We've been here
I
since
did,
7
and I
p.m.
offered-
and we've
Mr.
been waiting for
Stearns-
you to get to
Mr.
the hospital.
Stearns, you're out of order. You have not been recognized. I offered an opportunity at the outset of this hearing for public comment, and you did not take advantage of it.
That's inaccurate. You offered an opportunity in sequence. We've been here since 7. You were going to take up the residential and then the hospital.
And I offered the opportunity to both speakers at the same time.
That was completely unclear.
All right. Mr. Stearns. All right. I'm going to allow that, Mr. Stearns, even though I disagree with you, and because I want the committee to have the benefit of your comments.
Well, the comments are going to come from Mr. Meservey, and he's been told that he has 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is John Meservey. I'm representing Newton Wellesley Hospital. I'm here to try and clarify, I think, what is quite a bit of misinformation about our circumstance. We are in compliance through 2038 with our existing plant, even though it's gas-fired. We have been offered an opportunity for an exemption if we electrify the hospital, which means no gas. That is not our pathway to fulfilling our regulatory obligations with the United States government, which requires a second source of energy, not just one source, 2 sources. That second source can only be natural gas, okay? So we are not in a position to disconnect from natural gas. We have to have natural gas. Secondly, our infrastructure operates on high-temperature steam boilers, 240, 250 degrees. That is way beyond the range of heat pumps. For instance, there's a technology to replace the boilers. We have done an engineering study, and 30% of our existing load on the steam boilers can be replaced by heat pump, but 70% of the load on those gas boilers will remain until there's an alternative fuel to natural gas. We have been told, as I mentioned, that a hardship is possible, but there are no regulations, and it is at the discretion of the BERDO administrator. And we don't feel that that is sufficient clarity to confirm that the City of Newton recognizes the obligations that we are confronting. Thirdly, you passed in June of this year a fossil-free fuel ordinance which exempted hospitals. This is an alternative way of negating that fossil fuel exemption for hospitals by ratcheting down over time and finding our inability to comply, our presumed inability to comply with the BERDO emission standards. Finally, with regard to Boston, we have not applied for a hardship. We do not need to apply for a hardship. In Boston, we can aggregate the emissions of all of our facilities and reply as a single portfolio. As Mr. Ferguson mentioned, we can also...
Excuse me, your time has expired.
Thank you.
Okay.
So just to conclude...
Councilor Oliver?
Oh.
Yeah, Councilor
I just
Keeler.
want to conclude. I do feel, and I'm glad they were able to speak. I appreciate that, so thank you, Mr. Chair, because it just doesn't seem that we're on the same page. the city and the hospital. And it's very concerning to me because the hospital, it saves lives. It's just, it's critical infrastructure that I feel we have to hash out an agreement. I mean, the fact that they can, in Boston, aggregate, that's a big difference. That makes this apples and oranges to me. It's one hospital here. So I just think there's more work to do there. That's all.
So I'm going to recognize Councilor Oliver and then go to Mr. Ferguson, I think. Oh, excuse me, Councilor Christmas. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. The way that I'm reading this, and correct me if I go astray here, regardless of when Newton Wellesley is currently compliant until, right, sometime into the future. The way that I read this, it basically says you can have a backup system effectively of your choosing. Just let us know what that is so that we will bake it into the regulations when we write them, which begins the day basically after we pass this ordinance. Is that fair so far?
Yeah, that's correct. It allows them to either use a cogeneration microgrid, which would definitely be a gas-fired system, or other systems that they can propose that we can work out details on in regulation. So we're not requiring electrification.
Right.
That is not accurate.
Okay, right. So I am reading this right. It also goes further to say, look, our ordinance as it is drafted allows for two different types of exceptions. One for time, the individual compliance plan. There's also a hardship plan that allows for exceptions, not only for timing, but for total emissions or utilization or use of energy. It does seem to me that if there are additional asks, I think you and I have had enough conversations about this. It seems pretty obvious to me that as a city, we not only want Newton Wellesley to be outrageously successful, but we do have some preferences in how we go about doing this. I hear what you're saying, and unless I'm misunderstanding something, we've accommodated. It's in there. And if it's not in there today, let us know. You flip the page and let us know what other criteria you need for that exemption based on the, whether it's state or federal guidelines. It's in here. So I would be a little bit confused as to why this wouldn't cover the opportunities that will arise in the future.
Yeah, you're reading that right, Councilor Oliver. Our intention is to work with the hospital, make sure that they can comply with their federal regulations. If that means using gas, then gas will be allowed. It's not a electrification only requirement. We provide several pathways to other options that may be required, including gas.
We go to Councilor Christmas.
Well, if I may, just to kind of wrap this up, one additional thought. The only challenge that I see that remains is out of our control. There is a state level mandate by 2050. That's it. That's the only other opportunity or place where I can currently see that there would be a, now we need to have a conversation at the state level. What I'm seeing here is, like I mentioned before, they have the exemption they're looking for without us calling it an exemption.
Councilor Christman, then Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I read the exemption as drafted by Mr. Ferguson a little bit differently. I don't think it, well, the difference I think is that it gives the hospital the ability to apply for an exemption. We don't exactly know what the criteria are on which that would be determined, but it doesn't give the blanket exemption. It says you have to apply for it and apply for it every 5 years, correct? Okay. I also know that, at least my understanding, is that I don't know whether this sufficiently covers the hospital or not, but I know that the hospital doesn't think it does. And so I guess I would say that I share the consternation of the esteemed colleague from Ward 8 in expressing a hesitancy to pass something that we know the hospital is uncomfortable with or believes that has not sufficiently covered them. I also do feel a sense of urgency to move forward on this because I appreciate the comments that have been made about trying to pass something tonight, and I do want to try and pass something tonight. My inclination after hearing from the hospital, hearing from my esteemed colleague from Ward 1, Councilor Oliver, and my esteemed colleague from Ward 8, would be to perhaps task the advisory commission with crafting an appropriate exemption, give them some time to work with the parties that would accommodate the, I think we all want to accommodate the hospital. I think that's everyone's intention. I don't think that we necessarily have the expertise to do that tonight on this body, but we are, as we heard, looking to establish an advisory commission to tackle the regulations which could do this. So my suggestion would be to add into the requirements on the advisory commission that the advisory commission craft an exemption to account for the concerns of Newton Wellesley Hospital.
Okay. I've got Councilor Danberg, but Attorney Lee has got his hand up. Let me go to them, and then I will decide how we proceed. Councilor Danberg, and then I don't want to hear from Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I have a question through the chair for Mr. Ferguson. That is that the interpretation that I am making of the comments from the gentleman from the hospital are that they understand that the city has or is offering for their secondary system the ability to make a judgment on what's best. My question is, I heard from them or understood from them that they felt that 30% of their primary system could be accommodated electrically through heat pumps, et cetera, but that because they have a steam system in their primary steam system, that they would be unable to convert because of the difficulty of conversion when you have steam. If that's the case, would they be willing, again, a question needs to be asked at some point after this meeting because we're not going to settle it here, would they be willing to say, well, after the steam system reaches the end of its useful life, they would then convert the primary system to an electrical system? Am I correct in what I heard? And then would that be a possibility? And that question, again, cannot be answered tonight, likely.
Mr. Ferguson, were you responding?
Only that we are providing ways for the hospital to comply with circumstances over the next 25 years through this ordinance, through the hardship compliance plan, and through the reference to regulations that was in a section which also mentioned the microgrid. So there's all kinds of flexibility for compliance. And for the exact reasons you mentioned, we can't solve it in this room. We couldn't solve it after meeting with them for 2 years because I don't think they know yet what their plan is going forward. When they have a plan, we can work with them to make sure that plan works. And if that's still, if they can demonstrate that needs natural gas to comply, then that's still something that's on the table throughout the process.
The gentleman from the hospital, if I may continue, the gentleman from the hospital indicated that the city said that we would work with them if they agreed to electrify. Do we need to make sure that it's written in the ordinance that we meant electrify, that they have a unique case in that they have a secondary system and a primary system? Our insistence is not that they comply with the secondary system. Our insistence was only that they comply with the primary, and again, after their systems, their current carbon fuel systems fail.
Well, I think the primary system in this case is their steam system. They had mentioned at one point making a cogeneration system their primary system. So that's an option that we left open for them. That would be gas-fired. But we would, expect that over time, that they would be able to convert parts of buildings, at least, to gas, even if they had to stay on steam. Over time, there are parts of hospital buildings, such as offices, lobbies, conference rooms, those types of rooms that don't involve patient care or patient support, that we would expect them to want to convert to heat pumps and electrify. But that doesn't mean we would expect them to convert everything to electric if they're depending on a high-pressure steam system for the next 25 years to run their facility and to meet federal requirements.
And I think that it's incumbent on us to have that conversation with the hospital, because if they are indeed a hardship case here, as we were discussing with residential buildings that are on steam systems that may never be able to comply, and you'd have to tear the building down in order to achieve compliance, we need to determine whether this is in fact a case where compliance is not practical. So it's approaching 9:45. We would like to pass something tonight. This piece of it, I don't think can be crafted to the satisfaction of everyone tonight. Can we carve the hospital piece out and have this worked on with the city and the hospital and whoever else needs to come in? And can we move forward with the pieces that we can in fact agree on?
So, Councilor Danberg, I'm going to call on Mr. Lee in a minute because he raised his hand, but my sense is that you've got the ordinance applies to everyone. This is an exemption in the ordinance. You can't have a carve-out that somehow takes them out because they are in the ordinance. And so if you want the ordinance to go forward, you've got to make a decision tonight about what's in it. So I'm going to recognize Mr. Lee, because he had his hand up, but that's my sense of where we are. If you want to get this ordinance done, it's going to contain something that relates to the hospital tonight, or we can hold the item and continue it, but that's up to the committee. So, Mr. Lee, you want to be heard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on Councilor Krinsman's suggestion with regards to tasking the advisory commission with thinking about further exemptions possibly for the hospital. That's already contemplated in the versions that are before the City Council tonight. If you look at the exemption section specifically for hospitals, although it calls out healthcare microgrid systems. It also says, or other system as set forth in the regulations, meaning that the regulations can identify another type of system that serves the hospital for their backup generation needs that would then fall under the exemption that's in the current ordinance. Not only that, the hospital themselves are identified as a particular kind of use eligible to seek a hardship. The criteria for the hardship are going to be contained in the regulation. So that's another way that the advisory commission is going to be tasked in figuring out exactly what compliance for hospitals will look like. So I just wanted to make those two notes.
So let me just say as a matter of process, Mr. Stearns, I'm going to exercise the discretion of the chair to let you speak in response to this. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I do not dispute that the City of Newton is providing pathways. I think the issue is, do those alternative pathways still obligate the hospital to pay a fine in the event of an overage? The only pathway that does not obligate the hospital is electrification. So while we've been told, as you heard tonight, that we can continue to use gas-fired equipment as written, we are still exposed to being fined if we use gas-fired equipment and it is the greenhouse gas emissions are above the standard that's being set for a hospital. That is our primary concern, is exposure to penalties, because it works in the opposite interest of us fulfilling our obligation to reduce our greenhouse gases, eliminate our greenhouse gases, but also it flies in the face of our obligation to have a secondary power source in the event of major grid outage. I should also say, by the way, this past weekend, both electrical lines serving the hospital were out of operation. We had no electricity from Eversource. This happens on a frequent basis and is a major, major concern. Newton Wellesley Hospital is the only hospital in our system that's fed by overhead wires. All it takes is a car to run into one of the poles and we're out of business. So it's a much more significant situation and a much more significant risk in Newton Wellesley than it is at any of our other hospitals. And we're also not afraid of decarbonizing. Our new inpatient building in construction at Mass General on Cambridge Street should only be using natural gas on the coldest days of the year. The rest of the time, it's going to be operating 100% on electricity. So we know how to do it with new buildings, but we're talking about buildings at Newton Wellesley that are 100 years old. I wish it were a new hospital. It'd be a lot easier to operate. But these are the kinds of situations we run into. It is a steam system, which they don't put in hospitals very much anymore. It's a steam system, a legacy steam system. So exposure to penalty is our major concern. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I want to recognize Councilor Albright and then come back to Mr. Ferguson, Mr.
Well, I'm going to come to Mr. Ferguson, actually, because if penalties and fines are their primary concern here when they're really trying to do their best to do well for sustainability and so forth, could you imagine some kind of language which would exempt them from penalties and fines because of the secondary source gas?
It says right in the ordinance that a hardship compliance plan can adjust timelines and emission standards. So if they went through the hardship compliance plan process, we'd be able to do that under that process, which means that they would be in compliance with the hardship compliance plan and therefore not subject to penalties.
Could you add the phrase, and after, I forget, if they can't comply with emissions, and resultant fines, so that it's clear that resultant penalties and fines would be exempted.
That language is in the ordinance already.
I couldn't find it.
While you check that,
Mr. Chair, can I speak to that, please, to
Yes.
clarify?
sure, Mr. Lee.
I think Mr. Ferguson did a good job, but I'd just like to echo what he said, which is the hardship compliance plan, if you're compliant with it, there are no fines. Because again, you're in compliant. You only get fined if you're out of compliance. What the hardship compliance plan does is it adjusts can adjust the emission standards and or the target dates. Meaning that if you adjust the emission standards to allow emissions from gas through the hardship compliance plan, again, you're compliant with BERDO. There would be no fines at all to waive or accept, because I don't know how else to say it. They met all the requirements of BERDO.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. So let me just be clear here. We have a hardship opportunity that the hospital can apply for. I'm hearing the hospitals say they're not certain that they would be granted the hardship for the use of the existing facility. That's your concern, is that fair?
That's one of our concerns, for sure.
Say again?
Yes.
Councilor Oliver?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, but I still see that every single concern that's been raised on either side of the rail is covered here. I'm very confused. I mean, I'm confused to the point where it's in here. It's in here. Hang on, sir.
Yeah.
You won't be out of compliance with a hardship plan. You have the ability to put in the systems you need to remain compliant at the federal and state level, as best we know them as they're defined today. The city of Newton is basically saying, and if something changes, we will work with you to make the mods or the modifications to the regulations to ensure compliance. I don't understand what part I'm missing.
Well, if I can clarify it myself, what I'm hearing is that they're not certain that the requirement to have an alternative power source that is fossil fuel based will qualify for hardship. That's what I'm hearing. So we're having the city say, you can come in and ask for the hardship. The hospital is saying, we're not certain that the hardship will be granted by whoever is in charge of administering the ordinance for that purpose. So I guess the question that is before the committee, are we willing to accept the recommendation Mr. Ferguson gives that the hardship process will accept that in the future under some condition, or do we wish to have any carve out in the ordinance? Mr. Ferguson?
And before I yield, I completely agree. The one thing I will just bring up, and I'm also aware of the fact that I'm arguing a side of a conversation that I did not take part in. However, I don't think it was Mr. Ferguson that had the conversations with Newton Wellesley. It was the city of Newton. It's my understanding that there have been multiple people involved over a very long period of time here. This language at one point was acceptable to both parties, if I understand correctly. And they've since moved off of that point and onto a different set of circumstances. But it does seem to me that every concern I've heard tonight is accommodated, every single one of them.
Well, that's ultimately the committee has to decide whether to accept the language here. I think we're agreeable on all other matters, or to seek any alternative to that language. So I want to recognize Mr. Ferguson, then I'll go to Councilor Block.
Yeah, I just want to read from the ordinance under hardship compliance plans. It says, building designation, such characteristics or circumstances may include historic building designations, use of the building for hospital or healthcare institutions, pre-existing long-term energy contracts without reopeners or extraordinary financial hardship. Then it goes on to say, such plans may include alternative admission standards and timelines for compliance. So that's the intent of this section, is to deal with the kinds of issues that the hospital is presenting today. And with the advisory commission, I think we'll probably even have potentially an even better and more thorough response to how this hardship plan is executed.
So just to be clear, I think the choice is that we say a process that's just in the ordinance now will allow the application for a hardship which is designed to accommodate the hospital. The hospital is not satisfied at the moment that that's sufficient because it's not specific enough to be sure that the hardship that they see in having an extra source of energy will be accommodated. That's my understanding. So we have to decide in committee what we're going to do with this ordinance tonight. And I want to make sure we get through this if we can. If we can't, we can hold the ordinance and on this issue and then see where we go. But notwithstanding the fact, as Councilor Danberg has pointed out, it's 10 o'clock. If we can solve this problem tonight, I would like to do so. But I'm going to recognize a member of the committee first and then come to Councilor Block. Councilor Krinsman.
I'll try to be very quick. What I will say is that I believe there's consensus that we want to address the concerns of the hospital. We want to move forward. I will note that the hospital had submitted their own exemption language, which we could put into the ordinance, at least for tonight or for the next year or something like that while we work on this, and develop either an alternative or an exemption process that is less speculative, that is more known to grant the hospital the exemption they require, as opposed to an application process, the standards of which aren't exactly clear. So, you know, maybe I would motion that we add in the exemption language submitted by the hospital in place of the exemption language here to move the ordinance forward tonight. And then I'm happy to docket the item with anyone who wants to, but we can recommit to working on a more specific exemption.
We can entertain that motion in a minute. I just want to recognize Councilor Block. You wanted to say something?
Just thank you, Chair. My own reading of the hardship compliance plan section is that it's awfully permissive. And by that I mean it's at the discretion of the BERDO administrator. The BERDO administrator shall have sole discretion in approving a hardship compliance plan. And all the other stuff is mays. You may do this and you may do that, and such characteristics or circumstances may include historic preservation, et cetera, et cetera. I'm new to this particular conversation, but I had targeted the vagueness, in my view, of the hardship compliance plan about what entitles someone to a hardship compliance plan. And I can understand why the hospital is uncertain about how it would operate, because there aren't regulations, and the regulations should be linked to the ordinance mandate. And the ordinance mandate, in my view, is unclear here. Now, that's just my view, and I know a lot of people have worked on this hard, but if residential was going to be included, I was going to zero in on the hardship and when and how it must be implemented, not when it may be implemented.
Yes. Okay.
So that's all I have to say on this. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. So what I'm going to do is, because Councilor Krinsman has made a suggestion, which can become an actual motion at some point, but I think it's important to look at the language that is at issue. And the clerk is prepared to pull that up, and I'd ask Mr. Lee as our counsel to look at that and comment on it as well. Can you pull that up? This would, there's part of it that's cut off a little bit. Can you move it up? All right. So the net effect of this, Mr. Lee, have you had a chance to review this language at all? You've seen the
I've
letter.
seen the language before, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, couldn't understand you clearly. What did you say?
I've seen this language before, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So do you have, so this is alternative language that would take the place of the reference, the language, if the committee wishes to move forward with it. The question is, do you have any comment on this language in terms of its impact on the ordinance?
It would essentially exempt Newton Mosley Hospital from compliance with the ordinance. I would say that the first paragraph is unnecessary. And if there's any intent by ZAP to amend the proposal to include an exemption of this to focus on, I believe, the second and maybe third paragraph. I can't recall if there's another one after that.
Okay. So I'm going to make a comment as chair. This is a new language which you all have not had a chance to digest, and we're trying to do this on the fly. I don't think that's wise. I think we've reached agreement on all other provisions of the ordinance, but as much as it pains me to defer this item, I would prefer, let me hear me out. I would prefer to have it resolved successfully. Now, maybe we can't, but are we going to report this up to the council and we have to vote in committee on which version we like? Maybe that's the best way to do it and just see which version we like and we can report it to the council. So, but if we can't get to a relatively clean resolution, I don't think it does us any good to send something to the council at the last meeting of the year that's not going to be of a clean record. But that's my concern. So, Councilor Krensman, this is your idea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe we received this. Maybe it was just by email, but it was about a week ago. So I do believe the committee at least has seen this.
Oh, no, I understand, but I mean not reflected on it in the same way that they did.
Fair enough. I actually appreciate Mr. Lee's suggestion about removing the first paragraph. I agree that it's unnecessary or superfluous. So I think you've done everything by unanimous consent tonight. So, I would appreciate even just a straw vote or a look at the committee to see if there would be support for adopting the hospital's crafted exemption minus the first paragraph.
Okay. So let's just see where the members of the committee are. Those who are not members of the committee, I'm going to recognize her in a second. Unfortunately, can't vote on that matter, but I can hear from you. Councilor Getz.
I'm not supportive of, I have not seen this language, and I need to go through it. So I would support the hold motion.
Well, we haven't got there yet, but let's just see where we are.
I'm not putting the motion on the table, but I would support the idea that you had floated just a moment ago.
Let's do a straw vote in committee. So we have language that effectively responds to the hospital's concern by giving an exemption explicitly in the ordinance versus a process that the administration has recommended to us through Mr. Ferguson that establishes a process for qualifying an exemption in the future. All right, that's the choice in committee. So I want to get a sense of the members of the committee about that. Councilor Oliver, before I ask for a straw vote, do you want to be heard?
Just real quick, if I may, a question to Mr. Lee through the chair. Mr. Lee, you say you've seen this language before, yet it's not in the ordinance. Is that because the city didn't accept it? Was there something wrong with it? Why did we not use this language?
I'm going to ask Mr. Ferguson to embellish my response, but I'll take a first crack at it, which is it seems to be either a choice of exempting Newton Wellesley Hospital altogether. This is essentially saying that with a lot more words, or proposing the exemption that the city has put in the packet in the versions that I had sent to the clerk's office that is before you, where it has an exemption for a particular method of backup generation, and then also recognizes this other hardship compliance plan or further exemptions as set forth in the regulations. So those are the two different options, but the city itself was not willing to propose a full exemption for the hospital.
Mr. Ferguson, do you want to embellish any of that?
I see the language that concerned us. It says, for the purposes of this ordinance, these utility energy systems and their associated loads shall be excluded from all energy density and emissions contribution calculations. I mean, that's a complete exemption, so.
So let's get a sense of the committee, and I'm going to suggest that we have one or two ways to proceed. We can adopt amending language to the recommendation in accordance with what the hospital has given. We can maintain the language that has been given to us with the assumption that there may be an amendment someone would like to offer on the floor of the council, but to get the item out of the committee. I think the problem is that I'm not sure we can make a drafting decision in committee other than to adopt one or the other. I think we have to make that choice as a committee, and it may be a matter that has to be resolved at the council. It may be just an issue that the council will resolve based on further information. But that's, I think, if we're going to move this forward, we need to make a choice in committee and then report it out. And I'd rather do that than hold on to it, with all respect, because we've got only, this is our last effective meeting this year. We've got a whole bunch of zoning things to deal with at the next meeting. Councilor Albright.
Mr. Ferguson, that language that you referred to where it says, that, you know, it excluded from energy density and emissions, what's the difference between that language and the exemption that they're going to ask for and you give them? I mean, isn't that what they're going to say when they apply for an exemption under the ordinance? They're going to ask you to exclude the emissions from the gas? And isn't that the same? In a way, I don't see the difference. They're just putting it into the ordinance. They're putting their plan into the ordinance. Their exemption plan.
Well, I think what this does is it totally eliminates emission standards. What we would be doing under a hardship compliance plan is adjusting the emission standard.
I think there's a real policy choice we have to make, and so I'm going to ask for a sense of the committee of which way we would like to proceed in terms of whether we would like to adopt the Newton-Wellesley exemption or we would like to maintain the language as here, and then see if we can move the ordinance forward one way or the other. All right? So I just want to get a straw vote in the committee. Those who are in favor of adopting the Newton-Wellesley, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those who are in favor of maintaining the current ordinance, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have a divided vote. That's this is even numbers are very useful at times. So folks, I think we've got to decide if we're divided in the committee evenly like this. It's not going to be an easy conversation on the council because we've got to make a decision. Councilor Leary, you're not a member of the committee, but I'm welcome.
I'm not a member of the committee, but if this, I believe this will come to the city council and it will be a discussion. I would urge the committee to please vote this out this evening to the city council. I believe the city's plan of exemptions is very flexible. This is a working, living document. We're working with the hospital with all our best intentions to guide them and help them and support them move towards reducing their carbon footprint. That's what this is about. An outright exemption kind of absolves all that. It doesn't create that sort of focus or energy or purpose. That's totally unacceptable to me. But no one wants to fine the hospital. No one wants to create any hardships for the hospital. I mean, it's an important institution. It's a core community service. We will work with them. We'll bend over backwards. I know Mr. Ferguson is as flexible as he can, and I know the city council will be. So please, let's move this ahead. Let's put it to the city council, and let's continue to see this as a living document. And we'll be working with Newton Wellesley Hospital to work, as we all have to work. Before we know it, 2050 will be here, and it won't just be the city of Newton that's going to be talking to them about it. It's going to be the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
So I'm going to suggest this as a process. I'm going to move the item as submitted to us with the language that Mr. Ferguson has indicated was the administration's point of view. If that motion passes, that will be the report of the committee. If that fails, then I'm going to report that it did not prevail, but the council can move to substitute an alternative. But I do think we need to move something forward. So I'm going to move the item as submitted by the administration, and we'll see where the committee comes out. Councilor Wright?
You're just talking about the section with the hospital?
No, the whole item.
Well, we had other discussions.
Oh, you have other things you want to bring up?
No, but earlier.
Oh, those I think we'd all agreed on.
Okay.
Okay, the only real question is to report out the ordinance with the administration hardship provision, or to report it out with the hospital. And either way, it's going to get reported out, okay? So is that agreeable to the committee? Councilor Kalish?
I mean, it's not agreeable to me, but I'll follow your lead.
Well, I'm open to alternative. The alternative is to hold the item and continue to discuss this at another meeting, which I'm also prepared to do. But I heard from everybody here and the public that they wanted to move this forward. So that's why I'm trying to figure out a way to do that.
I agree that we have to move it forward. I also agree in part with Councilor Leary. I think that this is going to be a living document, but I have to say that I'm just disappointed in the administration after months and months of us pushing this issue with Newton, with the hospital, and we're still at a place where there's no agreement. And
I think there is a challenge in the process in the administration, and no disrespect to the hospital, they are asserting their interest, and they're asserting it vigorously, that they feel that they have a compliance problem under federal law. They do not wish to be subject to penalties because they have to use a fossil fuel that is not baked into the ordinance as exempt, right? That's what I'm hearing. And so the question is, are we willing to say, we understand that concern and we want to go forward with a process that allows you to bring that forward in an exemption process, in the process of the implementation of the ordinance, or do we want to have something in the ordinance up front? But I think we've got to make a policy choice on that and get this out to the council. Otherwise, we're going to be here again. But I don't think that's an issue that is easily compromised. It's either the commission, and the administration is certainly open, and Mr. Ferguson and anyone can have a conversation between now and the council meeting. But I think our committee has done all we can do on this question.
I agree, it's not easily compromised, and that's why I prefer we vote out the exemption language and then work on it.
You can't have it both ways. You vote it out and it passes one way or another. You're not going to work on it after that. I mean, you can come back and redocket this item, but that's, I think, we're trying to do all the work we can in the committee, but there's some things sometimes the council has to resolve. And this may be one of them. Councilor.
I just can't imagine the discussion on the floor of the council of this. I don't see how people who haven't been paying attention will even understand what's going on. So I'm worried about sending it forward with a choice.
Well, that's a fair concern. I mean, it's up to the committee. I'm just trying to respond to the sense of urgency that I heard all evening, that we wanted to move something forward. And now we've got a stumbling point which we cannot seem to resolve, and we can hold on to it and hope that somehow magic will occur. But ultimately, the committee's still going to have to vote one way or another. If the administration says this is the provision they recommend, and the hospital says this is the provision they recommend, we're going to have to vote on that, and the council's going to have to vote on it.
Can I just add, I mean, Mr. Ferguson has shepherded this through the system, but we don't know, Mr. Ferguson in another 2 years may not be here anymore. So they're going to have to rely on the new Berto administrator. So I think that's probably why they want some clarity, because they don't know who's going to be the Berto administrator at some point in the very near future.
If no disrespect to the hospital, their position is clear. They want, you know, for a whole variety of reasons that are important from their perspective, they would like that. The question before us is whether we wish to agree.
Yeah.
All right? It's not that their position is unreasonable. It's certainly reasonable. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. All right? Councilor Oliver, did you want to say something?
I did for a minute. I don't think I need to now.
Okay. So, Councilor Block, I need to get this through committee, but I'll recognize you for a minute.
Sorry, Chair, I appreciate the comment, the opportunity just to say that to me, this is an artificial deadline. I mean, I get that you have a lot of work to do in this committee. The 4-4 vote to me speaks volumes, and I share Councilor Albright's comment to send this to the full city council when this committee has been hashing it out and relying on Mr. Ferguson and you know, you really want the 24 of us to hash this out? This is why we have committees, and I, you know, I think it's unfortunate that it's such a close call, but that's just my comment, and the committee will vote the way it ever votes. That's
Okay,
thank you.
I appreciate that, and we don't want to ask you to do work at the council level if we can avoid doing it here. I mean, we can do it here, not avoid doing it here. Councilor Oliver.
Okay, now I want to say something. I'm really, as much as I appreciate both perspectives here, we are looking at an ordinance that the city of Newton has been debating and trying to work out an agreement with Newton Wellesley Hospital for some period of time. At the end of the day, the chair's right. We got to pick one. There's no middling. It doesn't make any sense. I do not agree that we just hold this item and keep talking about it. I think we've done that. No offense to my friend and colleague from Ward 4. Sometimes there is a time to say, yes, we have this baked. We're ready to go. I think we're there. And if it doesn't pass clean, so be it. That's unfortunate. But it won't pass clean if we stay at 4-4.
So I'm going to go back to my original suggestion. I'm going to move the item as recommended by the administration. We'll take a vote on it and see where the committee comes out. If the council gets to it and says, send it back, you guys cook some more, they can do that, but it's a choice. It's not a matter of just sort of saying we haven't figured it out yet, you know? There's sometimes we have to make a choice, painful as that is. All right? I'm going to move that item, move the item as recommended by the administration, and I'd ask for a roll call on this one because I want to be clear on who's who. Okay? All right?
And this is for option B.
This is for option B, with all the other amendments that we've talked about. You know, that's not before us. But the clear point of the report, and I will try and we'll make sure that this is clear, is that the committee is divided on what to do about Newton Wellesley Hospital. Newton Wellesley Hospital, I'm sure, will be heard from in the meantime, but we want to try and get something forward, okay? All right, all those in favor of the motion, say aye. Oh. And Councilor, you want to call the roll?
Yeah, let's call the roll. Councilor Albright?
Yeah, I knew I was going to have to go first. I don't know. Tonight is the first night I saw this new language.
Well,
I think I am. I'm going to abstain.
You're going to abstain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilor Baker?
Aye.
Councilor Danberg?
Aye.
Councilor Getz?
Aye.
Counselor Kalis,
Abstain.
Counselor Krinsman,
I will vociferously abstain.
You will what? Say again?
Abstain.
Okay.
Counselor Oliver,
Aye.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
So the vote is,
With 5 votes in favor, 0 nays, and 3 abstentions, the ordinance is approved.
so this is the ordinance that will be recommended to the council. It is open to any member of the council to move, put the item on second call and recommend an amendment to that. But I think we have to make a choice, and that's what the committee has done. So if there's no other business before the committee, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.